The world was silent, cloaked in the soft darkness just before dawn. The wind, gentle and cool, carried whispers that stirred the trees. Among the towering cliffs overlooking the ocean, a single boulder shifted. Slowly, imperceptibly, it began to move, revealing not stone, but flesh. A massive, weathered hand emerged, its surface rough as ancient bark, veins glimmering faintly like streams of molten rock beneath translucent skin. Far below, the sea roared and frothed against the jagged rocks, but up here, it was the sound of breath that captured the air. Long, shuddering, and ancient, like the exhale of the earth itself. For centuries, this giant had been still, entombed by time and silence. Moss had crept over the ridges of its face, vines had tangled into the hollows of its enormous chest. Birds had nested in its hair, unknowing, singing songs into ears that had once listened to the voice of the stars. Its slumber had been so deep that even the memories of its existence had turned to dust, forgotten in the stories of humankind. But now, the world was waking. The first light of the sun spread cautiously across the horizon, brushing the edges of the giant's form. The light caught the gleam of an eye, one vast and heavy-lidded, the color of storms gathering in the heavens. That eye opened slowly, an unhurried motion like the unfurling of a mountain's shadow. And then it blinked. The land seemed to shiver at that moment. Trees bent their heads. Stones tumbled. The birds fell silent, sensing a shift in the rhythm of the world. The giant's awakening wasn't sudden, it wasn't loud. Yet, it was an event so profound that the earth itself seemed to pause and hold its breath. The hand that had emerged gripped the edge of the cliff. Fingers the size of tree trunks curled into the stone, splitting it, sending cracks racing like lightning. With a groan that was neither pain nor relief, but something between, the giant pulled itself upright. Moss and soil tumbled from its massive shoulders, raining down into the sea. The movement was slow, deliberate, as though every joint remembered the ache of eternity. It stood. For the first time in countless ages, it stood. Towering against the pale sky, its silhouette seemed to blot out the sun itself. The giant's face was unreadable, a mixture of immense strength and quiet sorrow. Lines carved by time crossed its features, each one telling a story older than memory. The wind picked up, swirling around the giant, carrying the scents of earth and salt water. It tilted its head slightly, listening, though no sound was clear. A flicker passed through its eyes, a memory perhaps, or a thought so vast it could not be captured in words. Beneath it, the world continued to stir. Creatures large and small hesitated in their motions. They felt it too, this vast presence, this return of something that should not have returned. The giant turned its gaze downward, toward the villages scattered like specks along the coast. Smoke from morning fires curled into the air, the scent faint but there, reaching even its colossal height. It recognized the smell. It remembered the warmth of those fires, the hum of life. For a moment, the giant's shoulders sagged, as though carrying an invisible weight. A single tear formed in its eye, a drop the size of a boulder. It trembled on the edge, caught in the light, before falling. The tear splashed into the sea below, sending ripples that traveled farther than the eye could see. The world had moved on without it. Its hands, so massive they could cradle mountains, rested at its sides, uncertain. It glanced toward the horizon, where distant peaks called faintly to its memory. There had been others once. Giants like itself, titans who strode the earth when it was young and untamed. Together, they had shaped rivers, raised forests, and stilled the rage of the oceans. They had been its kin, its purpose. But the peaks were silent now. The giant tilted its head back and let out a sound that was neither a roar nor a sigh but something ancient and aching. It rolled across the land, filling the air like thunder, shaking the roots of the trees and the hearts of those who heard it. And then it stopped. The giant's gaze shifted once more to the small world beneath it. There was no hostility in its eyes, only wonder, sadness, and a faint trace of hope. The sun, now fully risen, cast its light over the creature, illuminating its enormity but also the fragility of its being. A shadow passed over its face as clouds gathered in the sky. It stood motionless now, a monument to something lost and something waiting to be found. The winds howled around its frame, as if begging for it to move again. And it did. Slowly, it turned, each step causing tremors that rattled the earth but held no malice. It wasn't leaving, it was searching. For what, even it did not seem to know. Perhaps it sought a memory, a purpose, or the echo of another heart as vast and lonely as its own. As it walked, the forest bowed, the rivers widened, and the world whispered its name in a language long forgotten. The beginning was not quiet. It was not peaceful. The birth of everything came with a sound so deafening, so fierce, that it could have shattered eternity itself. Light erupted from nothingness, chasing away the dark, and from that collision of forces, the Titans were born. They did not crawl forth timidly. They did not wait to be summoned. They tore themselves from the chaos like mountains rising from the sea, their forms vast, their existence a defiance of the void. Each Titan was a fragment of the universe itself. They were not shaped by hands, but by the forces that screamed through the cosmos. One had a body of molten stone, its veins glowing like rivers of lava. Another shimmered like the stars, its skin flecked with constellations that burned and shifted as it moved. One was made of shadow, darker than the blackest night, and yet its eyes shone like moons, unblinking and eternal. They were not born alone. With them came the colossal beasts, the primal forms of life that roamed the newborn worlds. These creatures were unlike anything the universe would ever know again. Their wings spanned horizons. Their roars shattered mountains. Their footsteps carved valleys. They were the heartbeat of creation, wild and untamed, unanswerable to any law. For a time, there was no division between titans and beasts. They moved as one, their immense power weaving the fabric of existence. Planets took shape under their hands, seas churned into being by the sweep of their limbs. They raised forests with a single breath and extinguished stars with a glance. But this balance could not last. In the heavens, a new force began to stir. The gods, born from order and light, looked down upon the Titans and saw chaos. The gods were smaller, less imposing, but their power was sharp and calculated. Where the Titans roared, the gods spoke with purpose. They saw the Titans not as creators, but as reckless giants who threatened the harmony they wished to impose on the universe. At first, the gods tried to reason. They whispered their intentions into the stars, sending dreams of peace to the Titans. But the Titans did not listen, for the language of the gods was foreign to them. They spoke in storms and quakes, in the roaring of oceans and the crackling of fire. To the Titans, the gods' whispers were nothing more than the rustling of leaves in a distant wind. It was inevitable, then, that peace would fail. The first strike came like a flash of lightning, blinding and brutal. A single god, armed with a weapon forged from pure starlight, descended from the heavens and drove the blade into the chest of a Titan who stood as tall as the clouds. The Titan let out a cry that shook the stars, a sound of pain and disbelief, before crumbling into dust. This act lit the sky with fury. The Titans, once united, became a force of unimaginable rage. Their bodies became weapons, their movements earthquakes. They struck back, tearing the heavens with claws and fists, hurling mountains into the skies where the gods resided. The beasts, loyal to the Titans, joined the battle. Massive wings darkened the skies as dragons the size of cities took flight, spewing fire that melted the gods' golden palaces. Leviathans rose from the seas, their roars drowning the songs of the gods. The gods, though smaller, were cunning. They created chains of light to bind the Titans, forcing them to the ground. They turned stars into spears, each strike piercing the flesh of the colossal beings. The heavens burned, the earth split, and the skies rained fire and blood. Among the Titans, there were whispers of betrayal. Some of their own had sided with the gods, believing in the order they promised. These traitors fought against their kin, their weapons crafted from the same earth and flame that birthed their siblings. Their treachery carved deeper wounds than any blade. For centuries, perhaps millennia, the war raged on. Neither side could claim victory. The gods were relentless, their numbers growing as they pulled power from the stars. The Titans, though fewer, were unyielding, their might unmatched. The beasts fought with primal ferocity, their howls echoing through the ruins of worlds. But even Titans could not fight forever. One by one, they fell. The gods, merciless and determined, chained them in prisons of stone and light. Some were bound beneath mountains, their massive forms turned to myth. Others were cast into the depths of the sea, their hearts still beating faintly beneath the waves. The beasts, too, were hunted. Their wings were clipped, their roars silenced. The gods stood victorious, but their triumph was not without cost. The heavens were scarred, their golden cities reduced to rubble. The stars burned dimmer, and the universe was quieter than it had ever been. The Titans were gone, but their presence lingered. The ground trembled where they lay, and the winds carried their sighs. The seas remembered the Leviathans, the forests the shadow of their wings. And somewhere, far from the gaze of the gods, the beasts and Titans stirred faintly in their slumber. Their story was not over. The world might have moved on, but their power remained, waiting. The void was not empty. It pulsed with something ancient, something raw and unfinished. Before light kissed the first stars or the earth knew the embrace of life, the void churned. It twisted and roared, a black ocean without waves, restless and infinite. And from its depths came the beasts. Their births were not gentle. They tore free from the void, clawing their way into existence as though the very act of being alive was an act of defiance. The first was a creature so vast that its body eclipsed all it touched. Its scales gleamed with the cold shine of midnight, and its eyes burned with the fire of the void itself, a reminder of the nothingness it had left behind. Its roar was not just sound, it was the voice of chaos, a vibration that rippled across time and space, breaking apart what had dared to exist before it. Others followed, their forms monstrous and magnificent. One was a serpent that stretched endlessly, coiling and uncoiling as it slithered across the void. Another was a beast of flame, its body a living inferno that left trails of smoldering ash in the blackness. And then there were the Leviathans, creatures that glided silently, their hulking forms studded with jagged spines and eyes that glowed like dying embers. The void did not create them for beauty or balance. These beasts were born of hunger. They were the embodiment of want, of the endless need to consume and grow. There were no limits to their power, no boundaries to their size. Their wings beat against the empty air, creating winds that stirred the chaos into something resembling form. Their claws scraped against the edges of creation, carving shapes from the nothingness. At first, there was nothing for them to rule but each other. They clashed, their bodies colliding with such force that the void itself trembled. Sparks flew from their battles, sparks that became stars, lighting up the emptiness. Their blood, rich and black, spilled into the nothing, hardening into the first stones. The beasts fought not for dominance, but simply because they could, because existence itself was a struggle. And then, something shifted. In the stillness between their battles, the beasts began to notice the faint glimmers around them. Stars, born from their chaos, began to flicker in the darkness. These tiny points of light called to them, and their endless hunger found new purpose. They reached for the stars, devouring some and letting others scatter. The stars, resilient in their own way, resisted. Some broke apart into smaller fragments, scattering across the void. From these fragments came the seeds of worlds. When the first worlds began to take shape, the beasts descended upon them like shadows falling over light. The lands trembled beneath their weight. Oceans boiled as their colossal forms passed through, their heat igniting the waters. They were not careful, nor were they cruel. They simply existed, and their existence reshaped everything they touched. One beast, with wings that stretched like the horizon, perched atop a mountain. Its talons sank deep into the rock, and the mountain buckled under its weight. Its roar shook the land, awakening volcanoes that spewed fire into the sky. Another beast, serpentine and endless, wove through the oceans, its coils creating currents so strong they split continents apart. The creatures were not alone in their chaos. Smaller life forms began to emerge on the worlds they touched, fragile things that cowered in the shadows of their massive frames. These beings, though insignificant, watched the beasts with awe and fear. To them, the creatures were not monsters, they were gods. And perhaps, in their way, they were. The beasts had no mercy, no care for the worlds they crushed beneath them. Yet, in their destruction, they created life. The fires they unleashed gave birth to forests. The waters they churned grew fertile with strange and wondrous creatures. The skies they darkened were filled with storms that brought rain to the barren lands. But their reign could not last. As the stars grew brighter and the worlds more complex, forces began to emerge that challenged the beasts. These forces were subtle at first, quiet whispers in the fabric of existence. The land itself began to resist, rising up in jagged peaks that scraped against the beasts' bellies. The seas churned not just in response to the beasts, but against them, rising in waves that sought to drown their flames. The beasts were not easily defeated. They fought against this resistance as fiercely as they had fought each other. But slowly, the balance began to shift. One by one, the beasts disappeared into the void from which they came. Some were cast down by the forces of the worlds they had shaped. Others simply retreated, their immense forms fading into the darkness as if they had never been. Yet their presence remained. The scars they left on the land became mountains and valleys. The currents they carved into the oceans became rivers. Even the skies bore their marks, with constellations that told their stories to those who dared to look up. The beasts may have gone silent, but they were never truly gone. Their essence lived on in the worlds they had ruled, and the life they had unknowingly nurtured. Somewhere, in the depths of the oceans or the shadows of forgotten forests, their hearts still beat faintly, waiting for the moment when they might rise again. Beneath the surface of the world lies a silence so profound it seems alive. It's a place where light dares not wander, where the roots of mountains stretch downward like gnarled fingers, gripping the unseen. But the silence is not empty. It is thick with breath, slow, heavy, ancient. The kind of breath that could belong only to things too massive, too old, and too dangerous to exist above. The air hums faintly, resonating with the low, steady rhythm of something vast stirring in its slumber. The walls, made of stone older than time, glisten with moisture and veins of metal that shimmer faintly, as though remembering a time when they burned molten. Occasionally, the ground shakes, not violently, but with a groan, as if the earth itself is restless. In this shadowed underworld, there are rivers, black as night, flowing with a liquid that glows faintly with a color not found in the world above. They wind through the darkness like veins, and their currents carry whispers, soft, disjointed murmurs that echo and fade. Some say these whispers are the dreams of the giants, lingering in the air like the smoke of extinguished fires. Others believe they are warnings, remnants of a time when these hidden depths were not so quiet. The giants are here, scattered across the vast expanse. They rest in colossal caverns that could house entire cities, their forms partially obscured by the shadows. Their bodies are woven into the earth, their skin blending with stone and moss. Vines coil around their arms, and stalactites hang from their chests like frozen tears. To look upon them is to feel small, to feel the weight of the centuries they have endured in stillness. One of them lies curled in a crater so large that its edges disappear into darkness. Its head rests on an arm the size of a mountain ridge, and its chest rises and falls with breaths so deep they could stir hurricanes. Its face, half hidden beneath a cascade of petrified hair, carries a serenity that feels out of place. But its fingers twitch occasionally, and its brow furrows slightly, as if caught in the middle of a dream too heavy to escape. Farther below, the beasts roam. They are not like the beasts of the surface, small and fragile, built to survive in the sunlight. These creatures are remnants of an older time, their forms shaped by a world without light or warmth. Their eyes glow faintly in the darkness, twin orbs of fire or ice, watching, waiting. Their footsteps make no sound, but the earth trembles faintly in their wake. One beast, a massive form covered in jagged scales, slinks through a cavern lit only by the faint luminescence of the black river. Its tail, long and spiked, scrapes against the stone, leaving deep gouges that bleed shimmering dust. It pauses, lifting its head to sniff the air, its nostrils flaring wide. There is nothing to hunt here, yet its hunger never fades. Another beast, larger still, prowls near an underground lake. Its body is covered in fur that seems to absorb the darkness, and its claws dig into the earth with every step. It stops at the edge of the lake, its reflection rippling in the glowing water, and lets out a sound that is neither roar nor growl, but something between, a sound that vibrates in the chest and lingers long after it fades. Despite their size, the beasts are cautious. They do not disturb the giants. They move around them, avoiding the immense forms as though fearing to wake them. Perhaps they remember the old times, when these slumbering titans ruled above and below, shaping the world with their footsteps and their fury. There are places here where the darkness seems alive, where the air feels heavier, thick with unseen eyes. These are the places where the legends say the oldest of the giants sleep, the ones who existed before time had a name. Their forms are buried so deeply in the stone that only fragments are visible, a hand reaching from a cliffside, a shoulder rising like a hill, an eye staring blankly from the cavern wall. In the center of one such cavern is a heart the size of a mountain, pulsing faintly with a light so dim it barely reaches the edges of the room. It beats slowly, once every few minutes, and with each beat, the earth shudders. The air grows warmer, and the rivers glow brighter, as if the heart's rhythm is the source of all life in this hidden world. Yet, for all their stillness, there is a sense that the giants are waiting. Their slumber is not the peaceful rest of the dead, but something heavier, something suspended. Their dreams are not quiet. The whispers in the rivers grow louder when you approach them, the air tingling with words too vast to understand. There are rumors of an ancient ritual, a sound, or a force that could wake them. Some say a single note from a forgotten instrument, struck in perfect harmony, would cause their eyes to open. Others believe it would take the breaking of the world itself, a catastrophe so great it would echo even to these depths. And if they were to wake, what then? Would they rise with fury, their long rest broken by the small, fleeting lives above? Or would they rise with sorrow, burdened by the knowledge of what they had lost? The beasts, too, seem to wait, circling the slumbering titans as though tethered to them. They are not masters of this hidden world, but its stewards, watching over it until the moment comes when the silence is broken. For now, the world beneath the world remains as it is, silent, humming, alive in a way that cannot be seen or touched. But the air carries a weight, a promise, that the silence will not last forever. Something stirs in the darkness, faint but undeniable, like the first breath before a storm. The air was fire. It burned with a searing intensity, thick with smoke and the tang of molten metal. This was no ordinary forge, it was a place where the mountains themselves bowed under the heat, their cores hollowed out to create a space vast enough to hold the gods' ambitions. Rivers of liquid flame carved paths through the stone, glowing fiercely and filling the cavern with a light so intense it cast shadows sharper than blades. In the center of it all stood the giants. Their hands, enormous yet precise, moved with a grace that seemed impossible for beings of such size. Sparks flew as hammers the size of boulders struck anvils carved from starstone, the sound reverberating through the cavern like thunder. The rhythm was relentless, a beat that echoed deep into the earth, shaking the bones of the world. They worked not for wealth, nor for art. Their task was a calling, ancient and unyielding. The weapons they forged were not mere tools of war, they were extensions of the giants themselves, imbued with their fury, their strength, and their sorrow. These were weapons meant to cleave skies and split oceans, to shatter mountains and carve valleys. They were the instruments of destiny, wielded in battles that shaped the very fabric of existence. One such weapon began to take shape on the largest anvil. The blade glowed red-hot, its edges sharp enough to cut through the air itself. The giant crafting it had eyes like smoldering coals, focused and unwavering. His massive hands moved with impossible precision, shaping the metal as though coaxing it to life. With each strike, the blade seemed to pulse, as if responding to the rhythm of the hammer. The fire that fed the forge was no ordinary flame. It was drawn from the heart of a dying star, its essence trapped and harnessed by the giant's ancient power. The heat was unbearable to anything mortal, but to the giants, it was a reminder of their purpose. They had captured a piece of eternity, and they were bending it to their will. Nearby, another giant stood before a molten river, holding a shield half-formed. The shield was vast, its surface etched with runes that glowed faintly, as if whispering secrets only the giants could understand. The giant dipped it into the river, and steam erupted, filling the air with a hiss so loud it seemed to drown out the world. When the steam cleared, the shield gleamed with a brilliance that rivaled the sun. These weapons were not forged alone. The forge itself was alive, its flames moving as though guided by unseen hands. The anvils hummed with a low, resonant energy, and the rivers of flame twisted and turned as if they too had purpose. This was a sacred place, where creation and destruction danced together, inseparable and eternal. Every weapon bore a story. One hammer, lying on a stone pedestal, seemed to radiate an almost unbearable weight, even at rest. Its surface was marked with cracks, but they glowed with an inner light, as if the weapon itself held back an unimaginable power. It was said that this hammer had been wielded to shatter a moon, its force so great that it had nearly torn itself apart in the process. Another weapon, a spear taller than the tallest mountain, leaned against the cavern wall. Its tip was forged from a fragment of the void itself, a piece of nothingness so sharp that it could pierce the unpierceable. Its shaft, carved from the spine of a primordial beast, was etched with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. These weapons were not only tools of war, they were legacies, carrying the essence of the giants who forged them. Each hammer strike, each rune carved into the metal, imbued the weapon with the spirit of its maker. To wield such a weapon was to carry the weight of the giants' eternal struggle, to feel their power and their pain. The forge was not without its dangers. The heat, the flames, the raw energy of creation, it demanded sacrifice. More than once, a giant had poured too much of themselves into their work, their strength fading as the weapon grew stronger. They gave willingly, knowing that their essence would live on, bound forever to the weapon they had crafted. Above the forge, the cavern walls bore marks of battles long past. Deep gouges and scorch marks told stories of weapons tested, of clashes so fierce that the earth itself had been reshaped. This was not a place of peace, but a crucible of conflict and creation, where the giants prepared for wars that would echo across the ages. And yet, there was a strange beauty in the forge. The light of the flames danced on the cavern walls, casting shifting patterns that seemed almost alive. The sound of the hammers, though deafening, carried a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of the earth. It was a place of raw, unbridled power, but also of purpose and unity. For the giants, the forge was more than a place, it was a symbol of their existence. They were beings of creation and destruction, their lives defined by the weapons they crafted and the battles they fought. And though the forge burned bright, there was an unspoken knowledge that one day, it too would grow cold. The giants would fade, their weapons would be lost, and the world they had shaped would move on without them. But not yet. For now, the forge burned, the hammers struck, and the giants worked. And as the sparks flew and the flames roared, the weapons of the titans took shape, ready to carve their mark into the annals of eternity. A single footstep shook the earth. The trees quivered, their branches trembling as though bowing in reverence. Birds scattered, the sky momentarily darkened by their frantic wings. From the mist emerged a figure so immense that the very air seemed to bend around it, heavy with its presence. Its form was ancient, its massive frame weathered by countless centuries, yet unyielding. This was no ordinary giant, it was a guardian. The sacred ground it protected stretched far beyond what the eye could see, a place veiled in eternal mist, where the whispers of forgotten prayers lingered. The soil beneath its feet was rich, dark, and alive, pulsing faintly as though imbued with the essence of the divine. Here, mortals did not tread unless they were ready to confront something far greater than themselves. The giant stood at the edge of the sacred site, a sentinel carved from living stone. Its skin bore the texture of mountains, with patches of moss and lichen clinging to its surface. Its eyes, glowing faintly like the embers of a dying fire, scanned the horizon with a gaze that seemed to pierce time itself. In one hand, it gripped a staff taller than the tallest trees, its surface etched with runes that glimmered faintly with an otherworldly light. This was not a guardian born of choice. Its role was an eternal burden, bestowed by powers beyond mortal comprehension. It had been tasked with protecting something sacred, something that could never be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. It did not question its duty. It simply stood, a silent, immovable barrier between the relic it guarded and the chaos of the outside world. Not all guardians were solitary. In some places, pairs or even groups of giants watched over sacred sites. One such site, a valley cradled between two impossibly steep mountains, was guarded by three colossal figures. They stood in a perfect triangle, their backs to each other, facing outward. The valley was silent, save for the faint hum that emanated from the heart of the land they protected. The giants never moved, yet there was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged in their shared purpose. The relics they guarded were not mere objects. Some were fragments of the divine, shards of light or stone said to hold the essence of creation. Others were artifacts of unimaginable power, weapons or tools that, if wielded, could unmake the world as easily as they had shaped it. The presence of these relics was palpable, the air around them seemed thicker, charged with an energy that made it difficult to breathe. One such relic lay at the heart of a vast temple, its walls carved directly into the side of a mountain. The temple's entrance was guarded by a single giant, its figure hunched as though bearing the weight of the heavens. Its arms, folded across its chest, were as thick as ancient tree trunks, and its head was bowed, its gaze fixed on the temple's gates. No one dared approach. Those who tried had never returned. But there was a story, an old tale whispered among the bravest of travelers, of a man who once knelt before this giant, not with greed or violence, but with humility. He carried nothing but an offering of simple bread and water, his voice trembling as he spoke words of reverence. The giant had watched him, its glowing eyes unblinking, and after a moment that stretched into eternity, it had stepped aside. Inside the temple, the man found no treasure, no weapon. What he encountered was light, pure, unfiltered, and overwhelming. It filled him, stripped him bare, and when he emerged, he was no longer the same. His hair had turned white, his eyes shone with a faint luminescence, and his voice carried a weight that silenced even the most reckless. The guardians were more than protectors. They were part of the sacred sites they watched over, their very existence intertwined with the relics they shielded. When storms raged or the earth quaked, the giants stood firm, absorbing the fury of nature as though it were nothing more than a whisper. When armies marched, they crushed them with a single sweep of their massive hands, or a bellow so powerful it shattered armor and resolve alike. Yet, for all their strength, the guardians carried an unshakable sadness. They had watched ages pass, civilizations rise and fall, and still, they remained. Their purpose bound them, chaining them to their posts while the world above them changed beyond recognition. In one forgotten forest, overgrown with vines and blanketed in eternal twilight, a giant knelt before a tree unlike any other. Its bark shimmered faintly, and its leaves glowed with a soft, golden light. The giant rested one massive hand against the tree's trunk, its head bowed as though in silent prayer. The ground around it was littered with the remains of those who had tried to claim the tree's power, shattered weapons, broken bones, and the faint traces of dried blood. The tree thrived, its roots entwined with the giant's feet, its light pulsing in rhythm with the guardian's slow, steady breath. These giants were not mindless. They were ancient beings, burdened with knowledge too vast to share, too heavy to carry alone. Some said they could hear the voices of the gods, guiding them in their endless watch. Others believed the relics themselves spoke to the giants, binding them with promises or warnings. Whatever the truth, the guardians remained unyielding. They were the keepers of the sacred, the protectors of what was too precious, too powerful, or too dangerous to be touched by mortal hands. They were beings of stone and sorrow, of strength and sacrifice, and they stood between the world and the unknowable forces that could tear it apart. To look upon a guardian was to feel both awe and fear. Their immense size and strength were terrifying, but their purpose was undeniable. They were not monsters or tyrants. They were watchers, protectors, and in their silence lay a dignity that commanded respect. And so, they stood. Through centuries and millennia, through wars and storms, they endured. Their eyes, ever glowing, missed nothing. Their hands, ever ready, waited for the moment when they might need to strike. And the sacred sites, hidden and untouchable, remained safe under their watchful gaze. The mountain groaned. It wasn't the sound of shifting rocks or a distant avalanche. It was deeper, resonating through the bones of the earth, a low, mournful sound that carried the weight of time itself. The villagers below paused, their tools slipping from their hands as they looked up, their faces pale. They whispered in hushed voices, for they knew the mountain was alive. At its peak, cloaked in clouds, a shadow stirred. Slowly, with a grinding sound like boulders scraping together, the figure began to rise. It moved with the deliberate pace of something ancient and unyielding. Light broke through the mist, revealing skin that shimmered like polished stone, craggy and rough in some places, smooth and veined like marble in others. Its arms were massive, its fingers tipped with jagged, obsidian claws. But beneath the rocky exterior was something undeniably alive, a heartbeat so slow it was almost imperceptible, flesh pulsing with the rhythm of the mountain's eternal song. This was a stone lord, a being born of the earth and shaped by the mountains themselves. Its face was a mosaic of flesh and rock, its eyes glowing faintly like embers buried in ash. As it turned its gaze downward, the land seemed to tremble, as if bowing to its ancient master. The stone lords were more than mere giants. They were the mountains come to life, their bodies forged from the same stone and soil that formed the peaks they called home. Some believed they had always been there, born when the first mountains rose from the earth's crust. Others whispered that they had once been men, transformed by a power so old and fierce it had fused their bodies with the land they loved. Beneath their rocky exteriors was a strength unmatched. They could split cliffs with a single blow, carve valleys with their footsteps, and lift boulders as effortlessly as a child lifts a pebble. Yet, they were not creatures of rage or destruction. They were guardians, shepherds of the mountains, and all who dwelled within their shadow. One stone lord was said to wander the peaks of an unscalable range, his body so massive that he cast shadows across entire valleys. His skin glittered with flecks of quartz, and moss grew in the crevices of his arms. His steps were so slow that centuries passed between each one, yet every move seemed purposeful, as though he carried the weight of the entire mountain range on his shoulders. At the base of another peak, a village lived in harmony with their stone lord. They left offerings of food and crafted songs in his honor, their voices rising into the cold, thin air. In return, the stone lord protected them from avalanches and landslides, his massive hands carving channels in the rock to redirect the flow of snow and debris. He had no need for words, his actions spoke of a bond forged between the living and the eternal. But not all stone lords were protectors. Some were bound to their mountains in solitude, their existence a quiet, unending vigil. These giants were seldom seen, their forms blending seamlessly with the craggy peaks. Travelers spoke of seeing faces etched into cliffs, their expressions solemn and watchful. They claimed that the faces moved when no one was looking, their stony eyes following intruders with silent disapproval. One tale spoke of a stone lord who had been angered. A band of miners, greedy and desperate, had dared to carve into his mountain, breaking the sacred pact between man and stone. For weeks, the earth had trembled with his fury, his roars echoing like thunder. When the villagers finally climbed the peak to beg for forgiveness, they found the miners gone, their tools abandoned and their tunnels collapsed. The stone lord stood motionless at the summit, his eyes closed as though mourning the scars on his mountain. The stone lords were not invincible. Though their bodies were made of stone, time still wore them down. Cracks formed in their limbs, and pieces of their rocky armor fell away, revealing flesh that seemed too vulnerable beneath such a powerful exterior. Some of them had collapsed entirely, their forms blending back into the mountains they once guarded. These fallen giants became part of the landscape, their remains indistinguishable from the cliffs and peaks they had once ruled. Even in their stillness, they were revered. Pilgrims came from distant lands to touch the stones that had once been a giant's hand or to pray at the base of a cliff that had once been a giant's face. They believed the stone lord's spirits lingered, their essence forever bound to the mountains they had called home. In the heart of the world's tallest peak, there was said to be a gathering of stone lords, a secret conclave hidden from mortal eyes. The tallest of them, a figure whose head brushed the heavens, bore a crown of jagged peaks and veins of molten gold that shimmered in the light of the sun. They stood in silence, their presence a testament to the unyielding strength of the earth. It was whispered that these giants were the first to be born and that they had shaped the world with their hands, carving rivers and valleys, raising mountains and plateaus. And yet, for all their might, there was a sorrow in the stone lords. They bore the weight of the mountains, the responsibility of holding the world together. They knew they would endure long after the last human voice had faded, their vigil unbroken even as the world changed around them. In the silence of the peaks, where the wind howled and the snow fell endlessly, the stone lords stood. Their eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and their massive forms cast long shadows on the land below. They were the living mountains, the eternal guardians of the earth, and their presence was a reminder of the power and fragility of the world they had shaped. The sky grew dark, but it wasn't from the setting sun. The air shifted, thick with electricity, and the wind carried a sound, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in the bones. A figure emerged, stepping lightly onto a cloud as if it were solid ground. The sky itself seemed to bend around the giant, their presence commanding and fierce, a force that belonged to the storm itself. Their form was immense, almost too vast for the eye to take in. Their skin shimmered like polished silver, veined with streaks of glowing blue that pulsed in time with the distant rumble of thunder. Their hair was a wild cascade of storm clouds, curling and shifting as flashes of lightning danced through it. Eyes as bright as twin suns pierced the horizon, gazing across the heavens as if searching for something only they could see. This was a sky titan, a being born of wind and tempest, a ruler of the storms that roared across the earth. Their steps were silent, but with every movement, the air seemed to ripple and twist, as if bowing to their will. They carried no weapons, for they needed none. The skies themselves were their arms, the storms their fury. Above the world, the sky titans walked, their feet never touching the ground. They strode along the shifting clouds, their massive forms outlined by the electric glow of storms that followed them wherever they went. With a sweep of their hand, they could summon rain to nourish the land, or unleash a hurricane to remind the world of its fragility. There was a story told in a seaside village, where the wind never stopped howling, and the skies were always restless. The villagers spoke of a sky titan who had once descended to the edge of the sea, their towering form visible even through the heaviest storm. They had raised their arms, and the waves had risen with them, crashing against the cliffs with a force that shook the earth. But then, as the titan lowered their hands, the sea grew calm, its fury quelled. The titan had turned to the villagers, their eyes glowing with an intensity that could not be ignored, and the people had fallen to their knees, offering prayers to the giant who controlled the skies above them. Not all sky titans were calm or merciful. Some were creatures of pure chaos, their laughter the crack of thunder, their anger the roar of a tornado. One titan, known only in the whispers of ancient texts, was said to have torn the heavens apart in their rage. Their storms lasted for months, blotting out the sun and flooding entire kingdoms. Even the other titans had feared them, and it was said that they had been bound by chains of lightning, cast into the darkest corner of the sky where their fury could harm no one. Yet, the sky titans were not merely destructive forces. They were also creators, weaving the winds like threads to shape the weather and guide the seasons. One titan, said to be the gentlest of their kind, was believed to have formed the first rainbow. Their touch softened the rain, and their breath carried the light of the sun across the mist, creating an arc of colors that brought hope to a world battered by storms. The titans were not bound by human laws or emotions, but there was something in them that mirrored the earth below. They grieved when the land suffered, their storms turning from wild tempests to soft, steady rains that soothed the wounds of the world. They rejoiced in the beauty of the earth, their winds carrying the songs of birds and the scent of blooming flowers across the skies. High in the clouds, where the air was thin and the stars seemed close enough to touch, the sky titans gathered. They stood in silence, their forms towering over the heavens, their glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. Some believed they were watching over the world, protecting it from unseen threats. Others thought they were waiting, their patience as vast as the skies they commanded. Their bonds with the earth were unspoken but unbreakable. They listened to the whispers of the mountains, the cries of the oceans, the pleas of the forests. And when the balance of the world was threatened, they answered, not with words, but with the power of the storm. A farmer once told a tale of how a titan had saved his fields from a devastating drought. He had climbed the highest hill he could find, his voice hoarse as he shouted his prayers into the endless sky. For days, nothing happened. Then, on the fifth night, the wind began to howl. Clouds gathered, dark and heavy, and a figure appeared, towering above the hill. The titan raised their hand, and rain fell, not a storm, but a steady, life-giving rain that soaked the parched earth and filled the rivers once more. But there were also those who had tried to defy the Sky Titans, to challenge their rule over the heavens. A proud king, desperate to harness their power, had built a tower that reached into the clouds. He sought to bind a titan, to make them a servant of his will. When the titan appeared, their form darkened by the swirling storm, the king's tower was struck by a bolt of lightning so fierce it shattered into pieces. The titan's voice, deep and resonant, echoed across the ruins, a single word of warning that left the king trembling. For all their might, the titans were not invincible. They could be wounded, their forms cracked by the sharp edges of human defiance or the relentless march of time. When a titan fell, their body dissolved into the storm, their essence becoming part of the skies they had once ruled. The winds carried their memory, and the rain wept for their loss. Even now, when storms rage and lightning splits the sky, people look upward, wondering if the Sky Titans are watching. They feel the weight of the air, the pull of the winds, and they remember the giants who walk among the clouds, their steps silent but their presence undeniable. The Titans are the storm, the sky, the breath of the heavens, and their story is written in every gust of wind and every crack of thunder. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a low growl deep in the earth's belly, as if it were awakening from a long, ancient sleep. The air grew hot, a suffocating heat that curled into the lungs, burning the throat with each breath. Above, the sky darkened, not with storm clouds, but with the thick, black smoke rising from a yawning maw in the earth. The volcano was waking, and with it, the giants that dwelled within. The first rumble came like a warning, a sound that vibrated through the bones of every living thing nearby. Then, the earth cracked open, and from the depths emerged a figure too large, too terrifying for the human eye to fully grasp. The ground split beneath its feet, and molten rock bubbled up, spilling like a river of fire that followed in the wake of its massive steps. A giant of fire and ash, the ancient ones called them, beasts of flame and fury, born from the core of the world. Their bodies were forged from the same molten rock that filled the depths of the volcanoes, their skin a mixture of hardened lava and living flesh. They walked through fire, and where they stepped, the earth shook, mountains crumbled, and oceans boiled. These giants were both destruction and creation, as merciless as they were vital. To witness their emergence was to feel the raw power of the world's heart, a power so immense that it left a person breathless and reverent. When a titan of fire moved, nothing remained untouched. Villages were swallowed in torrents of lava, entire forests turned to ash, and cities turned to dust in a matter of minutes. Yet, in the aftermath of their wrath, new lands were formed. The cooled lava birthed new soil, fertile and rich, ready to be claimed by those who could endure the heat and ash. There was a story, whispered through the ages, of a giant who lived within the heart of a volcano that had not erupted for centuries. The villagers at the base of the mountain lived in constant fear, knowing that one day, the giant would rise and bring ruin with him. They spoke of his eyes, red like the glow of molten magma, and his breath, a furnace that could burn the very air. One winter, the volcano rumbled. The sky grew thick with smoke, and the ground began to quake. The villagers could hear the giant's footsteps, slow and heavy, as if each one was a deliberate reminder of the power that lay beneath the surface. The elder priestess, who had lived her entire life in the shadow of the volcano, gathered the people and led them to the temple at the foot of the mountain. They prayed in silence, hoping for mercy, but none came. The giant emerged, towering over the temple, his massive hands outstretched. He was as much fire as he was flesh, his body a shifting mass of lava and bone, with veins of molten rock running through his skin. His eyes burned with an intensity that could melt the heart of anyone who dared to meet them. But the giant did not destroy. Instead, he reached down, his fingers curling around the temple, not to crush it, but to lift it. His massive form was a beacon of fire, and with each movement, he shaped the earth beneath him, drawing rivers of lava across the plains. The villagers watched in awe, knowing that this was no ordinary destruction. They were witnessing the very creation of the land itself. Where the lava poured, new fields were formed. Where fire had scorched the earth, new plants began to grow. The very air was thick with the smell of ash and burning wood, yet in the center of this chaos, there was life. The land would renew itself, the world would be reborn, all because of the giant's furious power. These fire giants were ancient beyond measure, older than the hills and the seas. They were born of the world's fury, shaped by the heart of the earth itself. Their power was limitless, yet they were not mindless beasts of destruction. They were creatures of purpose, driven by an ancient call to balance the world. They would raise cities to the ground, but they would also give birth to new worlds from the ashes of the old. It was a delicate, terrible balance. In another tale, an island was said to have been swallowed by the sea, consumed by the raging waters of an unrelenting storm. For years, it was thought lost to time, a place where no man dared venture. But then, one day, a mighty eruption shattered the calm waters, and from the depths, a giant of fire emerged, towering above the sea. With each step, the land rose beneath him, the waves crashing against his flaming body as he formed new shores, creating a new island, reborn from the fire and fury of his arrival. The people of the new island came to worship the Titan, building their homes atop the rocky cliffs formed by his steps. The ash and fire that had once ravaged their world now served as the foundation for their existence. They saw the Titan not as a monster but as a creator, a being whose anger brought life, whose wrath formed the land they called home. But as with all giants of fire and ash, there was an end to their reign. When the flames had cooled and the earth had settled, the giants would return to the volcanoes, their bodies cooling as the fires inside them burned out. Their forms would slowly crumble, the once glowing veins of lava dimming to dark stone, leaving behind only the remnants of their power. The ground would heal, and the world would continue to turn, but the memory of the giants would never fade. The stories of these creatures echoed through generations, passed down through the years as a reminder of the delicate dance between creation and destruction. They were not to be feared, nor were they to be worshipped. They were a force of nature, ancient, powerful, and beyond human understanding. The giants of fire and ash were the world's heartbeat, and their legacy was written in the land they left behind. The wind howled like a forgotten song, whipping through the barren, frozen landscape. Snowflakes, sharp and cold, cut through the air like tiny, glistening daggers. The ground beneath was solid ice, vast and unyielding, stretching endlessly in every direction. No trees, no life, just the whisper of wind and the eerie silence that accompanied the cold. But then, breaking through this frozen expanse, came the unmistakable sound of something massive moving, slow, deliberate, like the tremor of the earth itself. A towering figure loomed on the horizon, emerging from the swirling snow. Their form was unmistakable, a giant, but not like any the world had ever seen. Their skin was the color of glaciers, pale and shimmering with an inner frost that glowed in the fading light. Each step they took left a trail of frost in its wake, the ice beneath their feet cracking like thunder. This was a frost-born giant, a being born of the coldest places on earth, a creature as ancient as winter itself. Their eyes were like frozen lakes, still and deep, reflecting the barren beauty of the frozen world they called home. They were massive, so much so that they seemed to touch the sky, and their breath came out in clouds of steam, freezing in the air before it could dissipate. These giants were not made of stone or flame, but of ice and snow. Their bodies were shaped from the frost that clung to the highest mountain peaks, their veins coursing with the chill of the Arctic winds. The Frostborn were the makers of glaciers, the sculptors of frozen landscapes, and the keepers of the cold. Where they walked, mountains of ice rose, valleys of snow spread out, and rivers of frost were carved into the land, creating a world that was beautiful in its harshness. The world around them was vast, untamed, and unforgiving, yet it was the world that the Frostborn giants had shaped with their very hands. They had created the great frozen wastelands, carving out valleys where the fiercest winds howled, and shaping the towering peaks that scraped the heavens. They had sculpted the ice and snow into something powerful and untouchable, creating an empire of cold beauty that stretched for miles. But the Frostborn were not mindless, destructive forces. They were as ancient as the earth itself, their connection to the land deep and profound. They did not seek to destroy, but to shape. They did not crave war, but rather silence, the peace of untouched snow, the stillness of frozen mountains, and the purity of winter's embrace. They were the cold architects of the world, shaping the land with a gentle yet unyielding hand. In the coldest corners of the world, where the light of the sun rarely touched, the Frostborn ruled. They built their cities of ice, great spires that rose like crystal mountains, shimmering in the pale light of the aurora. The air was thick with the scent of snow and frost, and the ground was covered in layers of ice so thick that no warmth could penetrate. Yet, there were whispers among the people of the south. Tales told by those who had ventured too close to the north, to the icy domain of the Frostborn. They spoke of the giants' quiet power, the stillness that surrounded them. Those who came too close to their lands would hear the wind rise like a warning, and those who ignored the warnings would never return. For the Frostborn had no mercy for those who trespassed upon their sacred ground. Their eyes, cold and unblinking, would watch as the trespassers turned to ice, their bodies frozen in the eternal chill of winter. It was said that the giants would take those who had dared to disturb their peace and turn them into statues of ice, placing them at the edges of their cities as a warning to others. But the Frostborn were not all cold and unforgiving. There was a softer side to them, one that emerged in the quietest moments. On the rare occasions when a wandering traveler stumbled upon their land and showed respect for the frozen beauty that surrounded them, the giants would offer gifts, gifts of warmth and life, brought from the depths of the frost. A piece of ice that could heal any wound, a snowflake that could bring the spring after the harshest winter, or the rarest of treasures, a single petal of a frost flower that bloomed in the most desolate places. The Frostborn were as much creatures of silence as they were of power. They did not speak, but their presence was felt in the very air. Their steps were the rhythm of the seasons, the flow of the winds that brought the first snow, the fierce storms that would tear across the land, and the stillness of winter's quiet rain. It was a power that could not be contained, for it was a force as old as the earth itself. There was a time, long ago, when one of these giants, a young Frostborn, still learning the ways of the frozen world, wandered too far south. They had heard the legends of the warmth that lay beyond the ice and snow, and they were curious. They journeyed through the desolate lands, watching as the earth slowly grew warmer, the air less biting. For the first time in their life, they felt the heat of the sun on their skin, and it was a strange feeling, one that filled them with both wonder and discomfort. As the young giant made their way into a village, the people ran in fear, terrified of the creatures that towered above them. But the Frostborn did not seek to harm. They had no desire for destruction. Instead, they marveled at the simple beauty of life beyond the ice, the green grass, the warm sun, the flowers blooming in the fields. The villagers, though frightened, saw the sadness in the giant's eyes and, in that brief moment, understood the loneliness that came with being a creature of the cold. The giant stayed only a short time before returning to the north, to the land of ice and snow, but something had changed. They carried with them a single flower, a symbol of warmth, a reminder that even in the coldest hearts, there could be a longing for something more. The Frostborn never spoke of what they had learned, but from that day on, the air seemed to carry just a little more warmth, the snow a little softer, the winds a little gentler. In the land where ice and snow ruled, the Frostborn giants remained, shaping the world with their cold, powerful hands. They were a testament to the unyielding power of winter, a reminder that even in the harshest of seasons, there is beauty, and in the coldest of hearts, there can be warmth. The surface of the ocean was still, reflecting the soft orange light of the setting sun. A perfect mirror, serene and undisturbed. But beneath, in the depths of the abyss, a different world unfolded. It was a place where light never reached, where the water was thick with ancient mysteries. And in that darkness, there were giants, colossal beings who lived in the cold, black waters. Silent. Timeless. watching over treasures and lost cities from ages long past. At the ocean's deepest trench, the water grew heavier with each passing meter, and the pressure was unbearable. Yet, in this crushing darkness, the oceanic colossi thrived. Their forms were like living mountains, slow-moving and immense, yet graceful in the way they glided through the dark waters. Their bodies were covered in scales that shimmered faintly like moonlight on the surface, and their eyes, huge and unblinking, held the weight of centuries. The giants moved through the water with such ease, as if they were the very current itself, creatures made from the ocean's heart, born of salt and mystery. The sea whispered around them as they passed, carrying the forgotten stories of civilizations that had risen and fallen, of ships that had sunk and treasures that had been swallowed whole. And yet, these giants never spoke of their past. They never needed to. For they were the guardians of what had been lost, the silent keepers of the ocean's deepest secrets. Sometimes, when a storm raged above, when the sky was torn with lightning and the waves crashed with fury, the colossi would rise from the depths, just enough to be seen. They emerged slowly, their great bodies breaking the water with a thunderous splash, towering above the sea like gods of old. Their massive hands, covered in seaweed and coral, would stretch toward the sky as if reaching for the very heart of the storm, their eyes glowing with a light that no human could comprehend. They were the ocean's wrath, the storm's true master, reminding the world of the power that lay beneath the surface. The treasures they guarded were not of gold or jewels, but of something far more ancient and precious. Lost cities, sunken palaces, and forgotten relics of a world that had vanished long before mankind had learned to write. These things lay at the bottom of the ocean, hidden beneath layers of sand and stone, forgotten by all but the ocean itself. And the oceanic colossi watched over them, never allowing a single piece to be disturbed. There were whispers, of course, among the sailors who dared approach the fringes of the great ocean. Some spoke of ships that had sailed too close to the forbidden waters, ships that had vanished without a trace, swallowed whole by the sea. Others spoke of glimmering lights that rose from the depths, of shadows moving beneath the surface, giant shapes circling below. No one knew what truly lay beneath those dark waves, but one thing was certain: the oceanic colossi would not allow any intruder to disturb their domain. And there were those who had tried. Greedy treasure hunters, desperate adventurers, and curious souls seeking fame. They had heard the legends of sunken kingdoms, of riches beyond imagination, and they set out with hearts full of hope and hands ready to claim what they thought was rightfully theirs. But none of them returned. The ocean claimed them, as it claimed all who were foolish enough to trespass on its sacred waters. What none of them had known, what they could not have known, was that the oceanic colossi were not mere monsters. They were protectors. They were not sent by the ocean to punish, but to preserve. Each piece of treasure they guarded, each relic they protected, held a piece of history, a story that could never be allowed to fade away. For the ocean had seen civilizations rise and fall, and it had felt the weight of time pressed down on everything. But in its depths, it kept the echoes of the past alive, sheltered from the ravages of time. Once, long ago, a young boy had wandered into the waters. He was curious, foolish in his youth, and determined to find the treasures the ocean hid so well. He ventured deeper and deeper, ignoring the warnings of the fishermen who had seen the shadows move beneath the waves. The boy dived without fear, his heart filled with dreams of wealth and discovery. And then, he saw them, massive shapes beneath the water, more than he had ever imagined. The oceanic colossi, their forms glimmering in the murkiness of the depths. He was afraid. But the fear quickly faded as he looked into their eyes, ancient, wise, and filled with an understanding that made him feel small and insignificant. They didn't come for him. They didn't strike him down. Instead, they simply watched, and for the briefest moment, the boy understood. He understood that the treasures he sought were not for him, that the ocean had no interest in his greed. The colossi, in their eternal silence, offered no judgment, only protection. They did not take, they did not destroy. They preserved. The boy turned back, returning to the shore, and though he never spoke of what he had seen, he knew his life had been forever changed. He had discovered the true purpose of the colossi, not to guard gold, but to guard memory itself. The treasures were not meant to be owned, but to be kept safe, protected by the Colossi from those who would forget the past. The boy learned then that some things are too precious to touch, too sacred to claim, and that sometimes the greatest treasure is the memory of what once was. And so, the oceanic colossi continue to move beneath the waves, guarding their secrets, watching over the sunken kingdoms of old. They are the keepers of the ocean's soul, the silent witnesses to history. And though their gaze is heavy with the weight of time, they do not mourn. They simply wait. For they know the ocean is eternal, and they, like the treasures they protect, will endure long after all else is forgotten. The sky split open with a deafening roar, and the earth trembled beneath the feet of those who dared to witness the end. The first time the Doombringers appeared, it was like the very air held its breath. Dark clouds gathered, twisting in unnatural spirals, and a cold wind swept through the land as if the world itself knew something terrible was coming. And then, they came. These giants, massive and towering, with faces twisted in eternal scorn, walked upon the earth with an unsettling calmness, their every step leaving the ground cracked and broken. Their bodies, cloaked in the darkness of forgotten times, seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. Their eyes glowed with a fire that was not of this world, a fire born of destruction, of an end that none could escape. It wasn't just their size that made them terrifying, it was the sheer inevitability they brought with them. They were not harbingers of mere chaos, they were the very embodiment of the end. Legends say that these giants were born of a time long before the earth was shaped, created not by gods, but by the ancient forces of destruction that shaped the universe. The Doombringers were not of flesh and bone like men or beasts, they were beings formed from the void itself, from the darkness between stars. Their existence was a reminder that even the most magnificent of worlds could fall into ruin, that nothing, no matter how powerful, could last forever. As the giants moved through the lands, the people who lived in their path would watch in horror, knowing that when the Doombringers arrived, it was not merely an invasion, it was the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy. These giants were tied to the end of worlds, the destruction of everything that lived. Their steps, heavy and unhurried, marked the final moments of cities, of civilizations, of all that had once been proud and mighty. But it was not just their arrival that struck terror into the hearts of those who saw them, it was what followed. As the Doombringers passed, the world seemed to warp around them. The earth cracked open, swallowing entire cities in the blink of an eye. The seas rose, crashing against the shores with a violence never before seen, as if the oceans themselves knew what was coming. Fires blazed with a fury that seemed unnatural, as though the very elements had turned against those who stood in their way. Everywhere the Doombringers went, the land was left in ruins. Forests turned to ash, rivers ran dry, and the skies turned black, the sun blotted out by the storm of their wake. Nothing could stop them, not prayers, not armies, not the efforts of desperate people. They did not rage, they did not howl. They moved with the calm of inevitability, as though they knew this was their purpose, the reason for their existence, to bring the end. It wasn't always that the Doombringers destroyed with violence. Sometimes, they simply waited. Their presence was enough. The mere sight of them was enough to bring despair to the hearts of those who saw them. They didn't need to swing weapons or crush cities with their hands, their very existence was an omen. The very air would grow heavy, the light would grow dim, and those who knew the stories would feel the cold grip of fear around their hearts. Yet, there was something else about the Doombringers that no one could deny, something that few dared to speak of. As much as they were harbingers of destruction, they were also tied to creation. After the devastation they left in their wake, the world would begin to heal, slowly and painfully, but always with the promise of rebirth. The land that had once been scorched would become fertile again. The seas that had risen to swallow cities would recede, leaving behind new shores. The fire that had burned everything to the ground would, in time, give way to new life. The Doombringers, in their terrible power, were both the destroyers and the creators. They brought death, yes, but they also made room for life to emerge again, in ways that could never have happened without their passing. The people of old understood this paradox. They feared the Doombringers, yes, but they also revered them. To some, the giants were gods of a different sort, creatures who were not just agents of an apocalypse, but also the necessary force to clear the old, to make way for the new. There were those who prayed for their arrival, who saw in them the destruction needed to start over. After all, how could something grow if it wasn't given the chance to rise from the ashes? But for most, the sight of the Doombringers meant only one thing: despair. It meant the end of everything they knew and loved. Families would gather, holding each other close, whispering final words of love and sorrow, knowing that their time had come. But even in these moments, when the Doombringers loomed over the horizon, there were still some who held out hope. They knew that while the giants could destroy, they could not erase everything. Life, it seemed, always found a way. One such story was told by an old woman who had witnessed the passing of the Doombringers in her youth. She spoke of the giants moving slowly through her village, their presence like a shadow stretching across the land. People scattered in fear, but the old woman stayed. She watched as the giants passed, their gaze meeting hers for a fleeting moment. There was no fear in their eyes, only a quiet understanding. In that brief exchange, she felt something stir within her, something ancient and eternal. And when the giants moved on, leaving behind nothing but the echo of their footsteps, the old woman knew that the end had not come, not for her, not for her people. It had come for the world they had known, yes. But from that end, something new would rise. Years later, when the land had healed, the woman would tell the story of the Doombringers not as mere destroyers, but as creatures tied to the great cycle of life itself. She spoke of how they, in their terrible power, had cleared the old world to make space for the new, and how even in the face of such despair, there was always the possibility of rebirth. The Doombringers were not just the end of things, they were the beginning of something else. The sky had darkened, and the earth trembled once again. The Doombringers were coming. But this time, their steps were not just the footsteps of destruction, they were the promise of something else. Something that would rise from the ashes of what had once been. They say time is a river, always flowing, never still. But some giants, the wanderers, do not know the river's current. They walk in places where time does not exist, or at least not in the way we understand it. These giants do not march in the straight line of days and nights. They wander outside of it, moving through moments like a breeze shifts through the leaves of an ancient tree. They have seen the beginning of worlds and the end of others. They exist, and yet they do not exist, bound by no clock, no sun, no moon. The first time one is seen, it is impossible to know whether it is a vision or reality. Some believe they walk between the cracks of time itself. One moment, they are there, towering over the horizon, their eyes ancient, reflecting the stars of forgotten ages, and the next, they are gone, as if they were never there at all. They appear in places that make no sense, at the edge of the world, where the land ends and the sea begins, or in the middle of a great desert, where nothing should be but emptiness. And when they vanish, there is no trace. No footprints, no signs of their passing. Just the faint echo of their presence, lingering in the air, like the ghost of a dream. The wanderers know nothing of the lives we live. Time, to them, is a strange thing. They watch the world move forward, and yet they are not part of it. They are not limited by it. They can step backward or forward, drift like shadows through years and centuries as if the days were nothing more than leaves in a breeze. It is said that they have seen the rise of the first kingdoms, and they have watched them crumble into dust. They have witnessed the birth of stars, and the death of the ones that no longer shine. They know what it is to feel the weight of the world, and the freedom of being able to leave it behind. No one knows why the wanderers roam the spaces between moments. No one knows why they walk the edges of time itself, stepping in and out of places where their presence is felt only as a ripple in the fabric of existence. Some believe they are keepers of lost memories, guardians of forgotten histories. Others think they are the mourners of worlds that came before, silently watching as they fade into nothingness, unable to interfere, unable to change the course of time. One tale speaks of a wanderer who was seen standing at the edge of a forgotten city, one that had been swallowed by the earth centuries ago. The giant stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the city slowly return to the soil, its stone walls crumbling into dust. The people who saw the giant did not speak of it for years. They could not. The giant had been there, and yet it was as though it had never been. But in the hearts of those who witnessed the sight, something changed. They could feel time in a way they never had before, as though they were seeing the world not just for what it was, but for what it had been, and what it might one day become. They understood that everything, even the things that seemed eternal, were bound to change. The wanderer had no need to speak, its very presence was enough. It is said that the wanderers do not feel the passing of time as we do. To them, years are like fleeting moments, like the blink of an eye. They do not age, they do not grow weary, and they do not experience the rush of time's passage. Instead, they move through it like water flowing over smooth stones. Their eyes, ancient beyond reckoning, have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, and the changing of landscapes. They have seen it all, and yet they remain unchanged, unaffected by the cycles of life and death that define the world of those bound by time. The wanderers do not fear the future, for they have seen it. They do not grieve for the past, because they have already lived it. Their lives are not measured in moments or years. They are timeless, existing in a space beyond all that we know. And in their wandering, they have come to understand the quiet beauty of time's passing. To them, the flow of time is like the wind on a calm evening, moving softly and gently through the world. They do not need to race against it, for they are not afraid of it. But perhaps, in their eternal wandering, they have learned something that no mortal can ever truly grasp, that time, for all its power, is not something to be feared. It is simply a force that moves forward, carrying all things with it, to places unknown. And in the vastness of time, there is room for everything: joy, sorrow, beginnings, and endings. The wanderers have seen it all, and yet they are untouched by it. They remain constant, like the stars that hang in the sky, waiting for the moment when the world finally ends, and they will continue to wander in the endless night. The last time one was seen, it was in the quiet of the night. The sky was clear, the moon bright, casting long shadows over the land. And there, just beyond the edge of the forest, it stood, a giant, silent, watching. Its gaze was not of this world. Its eyes seemed to hold the weight of ages, reflecting the entire history of existence, from the first breath of creation to the inevitable silence of its end. The air was thick with something unspoken, a sense of profound stillness that hung heavy, as if the world itself held its breath in the presence of this giant. And then, just as quietly as it had appeared, the wanderer vanished. Not with a flash, not with a sound, but simply gone. The world continued, the moon still shining, the trees swaying gently in the wind. But for those who had seen it, there was no mistaking the feeling that lingered in the air long after it was gone. Time had touched them, and they had touched time. And in that fleeting moment, the wanderer had shown them a glimpse of eternity. The ocean is not silent. Beneath the rolling waves, where light fades and shadows rule, there is a hum, a pulse as old as the world itself. It is the heartbeat of something vast, something unimaginable. Sailors speak of it in whispers, their faces pale under the moonlight. They have no name for it, only dread. But the stories persist. There, in the crushing depths, lies the Leviathan, a creature so massive that its shadow can eclipse entire fleets, its roar louder than the fiercest storm. The first tale begins with a horizon that burned. A lone ship drifted into calm waters, its crew exhausted but relieved to escape the chaos of a tempest. But the calm betrayed them. As the sun sank into the sea, the waters darkened unnaturally, and the ship began to tremble. It was not the wind or the waves, it was something beneath, moving, rising. The surface of the sea swelled as though the ocean itself was exhaling, and then it came into view. Eyes the size of boulders glared from beneath the water, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. A single swipe of its gargantuan tail sent waves crashing against distant shores. The crew could do nothing but watch, frozen in terror, as the Leviathan emerged, its scales glistening like molten silver, its maw wide enough to swallow the ship whole. And when it let out its cry, a sound so low and resonant it seemed to shake the stars, the crew knew they were in the presence of something that defied gods and men alike. The Leviathan is not alone. Across the seas, there are whispers of others, its kin, born of storms and chaos. Some say they are guardians, protectors of treasures buried beneath the ocean floor. Others claim they are punishments, unleashed upon humanity for its arrogance. There is no way to know for certain, for those who encounter these beasts rarely return. In the icy waters of the north, sailors speak of the Jormungandr, a serpent said to encircle the entire world. Its body coils through the seas, its scales cold as frost, and its breath freezes the air. Legend has it that its awakening will herald the end of all things, a cataclysm that will drown the world in icy wrath. Its hiss, they say, can be heard even on calm nights, echoing through fjords and over frozen tundras. Farther south, in warmer seas, there are tales of the kraken, a creature of tentacles and rage. Unlike the leviathan, the kraken does not rise with warning. It drags its prey beneath the waves, silent and swift. Ships vanish, their broken masts washed ashore days later, wrapped in slimy tendrils as thick as ancient tree trunks. Those who have glimpsed it tell of its glowing eyes peering from the depths, of its immense arms that reach toward the surface like the limbs of some malevolent god. And then there is the Tiamat, a creature born of chaos itself. Its form is ever-changing, shifting like the sea. One moment it is a serpent, the next, a mass of writhing limbs and jagged teeth. Ancient texts speak of Tiamat as the mother of all sea monsters, a being that gave life to the chaos of the oceans. It is said she was cast into the abyss by the gods, her rage so great that it churned the seas into eternal motion. But some believe she still stirs, waiting for the day when she will rise again to reclaim her dominion. These creatures are not just beasts, they are forces of nature, embodiments of the ocean's raw power. They represent its duality, the beauty and the terror, the life-giving waters and the unrelenting storms. To look upon them is to see the untamed heart of the sea, to understand its indifference to the fragile lives of those who sail upon it. The myths say that some dared to confront these giants, wielding weapons forged in divine fires, their hearts steeled by desperation. Heroes, or perhaps fools, who thought they could challenge the ocean's will. Some succeeded, their victories immortalized in song and story. Others were swallowed whole, their names lost to the depths. But for all their ferocity, there are those who believe these colossi are not merely destructive. There are legends of sailors spared by the Leviathan, of villages warned of incoming tsunamis by the sudden appearance of the kraken's tentacles breaking the waves. A child lost at sea was said to have been carried to safety on the back of a creature so immense it was mistaken for an island. These stories suggest that the beasts, for all their might, are not mindless. They are ancient, intelligent in ways that humans cannot comprehend. Some say the Leviathan mourns. Its cry is not one of rage, but sorrow, a lament for the destruction wrought by those who cannot respect the sea. Its kin, too, are said to carry a sadness in their vast hearts, a longing for a time when the world was simpler, purer. Perhaps that is why they appear so rarely. Perhaps they wish to avoid us, to remain hidden in the shadows of the ocean, where they can live untroubled by the chaos of mankind. The ocean remembers everything. It remembers the first sailors who set out in search of new lands, and it remembers the ships that dared to challenge its power. It remembers the battles fought on its surface, the treasures lost in its depths. And it remembers the Leviathan and its kin, creatures older than memory, older than time. They are the living embodiment of the ocean's will, its guardians, its executioners, its eternal witnesses. When the wind quiets and the waves still, there is a moment when the ocean seems to hold its breath. In that silence, some say, the Leviathan stirs. And for those who have seen it, for those who have felt the weight of its gaze, the tremor of its presence, it is a moment they will carry with them forever. The ocean is not silent, and neither are its colossi. They wait, beneath the waves, watching, listening. The earth quakes, but not from any natural force. The trembling comes from footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and unrelenting. Across the vast, open plains where the horizon stretches endlessly, something colossal moves. It towers over trees, its shadow swallowing entire hills. Grasslands, once teeming with life, fall silent in its wake. This is no ordinary creature. It is a behemoth, a beast of such immense power that its very existence bends the world around it. Long ago, armies marched confidently across these lands. They carried weapons sharp enough to cut steel and shields thick enough to withstand the mightiest of blows. But they were no match for what awaited them. The stories tell of a beast, its hide tougher than stone and its hunger insatiable. The first to see it was a scout, a man who climbed to a hilltop to gain a clearer view of the battlefield. His scream was the only warning the army received before the creature struck. It was not simply its size that made it terrifying, though it was large enough to flatten entire battalions with a single step. It was the way it moved, with a strange, calculated grace. Its eyes burned like embers, glowing with a cruel intelligence. Its roar split the air, deafening and disorienting, sending soldiers stumbling in terror. And then came the charge. The plains themselves seemed to rise and fall as the beast thundered forward, the ground cracking under its weight. Spears and arrows shattered against its body, useless as twigs. Those who tried to stand their ground were swept aside, their ranks broken like dry leaves in a storm. And when it was done, when the creature had devoured men and mangled machines, it vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only a scarred landscape and the echoes of its destruction. Behemoths are not merely destroyers, they are reshapers of the land. In the wake of their movements, rivers change course, forests are uprooted, and mountains crumble. Where once there was a field of golden wheat, there might now be a deep ravine carved by the weight of their passing. Some say these creatures are nature's answer to humanity's arrogance, a way of reclaiming what has been taken. Others believe they are ancient beings from a time before men, guardians of the world who act when balance is disturbed. There are whispers of different kinds of behemoths, each tied to the land it roams. In the golden savannas, a creature with horns like towering spires is said to wander, its footsteps shaking the very bones of the earth. It moves with a calm majesty, but when angered, it unleashes a fury unmatched by any storm. Tribes speak of watching it from afar, their hearts filled with both awe and terror, knowing that to cross its path is to invite certain doom. In the rocky plateaus, there is another, a beast so massive it seems to be part of the terrain itself. Travelers often mistake it for a mountain until it shifts, its immense bulk rising with a groan like grinding stone. This one does not roar, it does not need to. Its silence is its weapon, and its presence alone is enough to drive entire caravans to turn back in fear. It moves slowly, deliberately, as though time bends around it, reshaping the world one step at a time. The myths do not stop there. Some speak of behemoths with the power to summon storms, their breath hot as desert winds or cold as the northern gales. Others are said to have hides covered in moss and vines, as though the earth itself clings to them. But all share one trait: they are unyielding, unstoppable forces of nature that demand respect. There are stories of those who have tried to tame these creatures, to bend them to their will. They are always tragic. One tale tells of a king who sought to capture a behemoth to use as a weapon of war. He sent hundreds of men to hunt the creature, equipping them with nets forged of iron and chains as thick as tree trunks. They found the beast after weeks of searching, its massive form grazing peacefully on the open plains. But the moment they attacked, the calm was shattered. The beast retaliated, tearing through their traps as though they were made of string. By the time it was done, the king's army was no more, and the plains had become a wasteland of broken earth and shattered dreams. Yet not all encounters end in bloodshed. There are rare accounts of wanderers who claim to have seen these giants from a distance, unbothered and uninterested in the tiny figures watching them. These stories speak of a strange kind of harmony, as though the behemoths understand the land in a way humans cannot. One such tale tells of a farmer who, upon losing his crops to a drought, prayed to the gods for help. The next morning, he awoke to find the earth freshly tilled and fertile, as though a great force had passed through during the night. No tracks were found, only the whispers of grass bending in the wind. Some believe the behemoths are ancient protectors, bound to the land and its people. Others see them as warnings, reminders of the power that lies beyond human control. Whatever they are, their presence is undeniable. To witness one is to feel the weight of the world itself, to understand the fragility of existence in the face of such overwhelming strength. When the sun sets over the plains and the shadows stretch long, some say you can hear them. Low, rumbling sounds like distant thunder, or perhaps the breathing of something immense resting just beyond the horizon. In that moment, as the wind carries the scent of earth and grass, there is a feeling, a quiet reverence for the behemoths that roam, unbound and eternal, reshaping the world with every step. The air thickens, as though the world itself holds its breath. A ripple moves across the land, a subtle warning too late to be heeded. From the depths of shadow and chaos, it comes, an ancient beast, a serpent so vast its body seems endless, winding across the terrain like a living storm. Its scales shimmer with an oily iridescence, reflecting the dying light of the sun in hues both beautiful and terrifying. This is no ordinary creature. This is a Wyrm, a being born of destruction, whose mere existence twists the world into chaos. Its movement is silent at first, the only sound the faint whisper of its scales brushing the earth. But when it rises, its head towering like a dark monolith against the sky, the silence is shattered. A roar erupts, more than sound, it's a force, a primal scream that reverberates through the bones of all who hear it. Trees bow to its fury, rivers surge as if they seek escape, and the ground trembles as if alive with fear. The Wyrm embodies chaos itself, an unstoppable force that leaves ruin in its wake. Towns crumble beneath its wrath, their defenses mere playthings to its endless power. Walls that once held strong against the fiercest armies are nothing but brittle lines of sand to its crushing advance. It doesn't seek gold or power. It seeks only destruction, a living tempest that devours all in its path. Legends tell of Wyrms slumbering in the depths of the earth, hidden beneath mountains or curled in the forgotten hollows of ancient forests. They rest for centuries, their breaths slow and deep, until something stirs them. Some say it is the scent of blood, the cries of war, or the trembling of the earth itself that wakes them. Others believe they are guardians, waiting for a world so broken that only chaos can reset it. Whatever the reason, when a Wyrm rises, nothing is ever the same. And then there are the wyverns. Smaller than the Wyrms, but no less deadly, they are chaos given wings. Their forms are sleek, their movements swift and precise, like a dagger in the dark. They strike from the skies, their wings slicing through the air with the force of a hurricane. Their cries are piercing, carrying on the wind like the sound of an oncoming storm. Where a Wyrm is a tide of destruction, a wyvern is a whirlwind, a focused, brutal force that leaves scars in the earth and fear in the hearts of all who witness it. Wyverns are creatures of cunning, using their speed and agility to outmatch even the most seasoned warriors. Their talons carve through stone, their tails whip like chains, and their breath, some say it carries fire, while others speak of poison or frost that turns flesh to ice. Entire villages have been reduced to smoldering ruins or frozen wastelands in their wake. Survivors speak in hushed tones of the wyvern's gaze, eyes like molten gold that see not just the world but the fear in those who face it. Despite their ferocity, the Wyrm and the wyvern are not mindless. There is an intelligence behind their chaos, a dark and ancient cunning that makes them all the more terrifying. They do not strike randomly, their attacks are precise, calculated to cause the greatest destruction. Stories tell of Wyrms leading armies of beasts, their roars commanding legions of monstrous creatures. Wyverns, meanwhile, are said to hunt in pairs or small groups, their movements so coordinated they seem like a single being. Some say the Wyrm and the wyvern are not enemies of humanity, but punishments. They are the earth's wrath, born of anger at the arrogance of men. Those who mine too deeply, who take too much, who forget the balance of the world, these are the ones who summon the beasts. One tale speaks of a kingdom so rich in gold that its rivers ran yellow with the dust of it. The people grew greedy, digging ever deeper into the mountains for more. They unearthed a Wyrm, its massive form coiled around a vein of gold as if it had been born of the metal itself. When it awoke, the kingdom was erased from the world, its name remembered only as a cautionary whisper. There are rare accounts of those who have faced the Wyrm or wyvern and lived. Warriors clad in enchanted armor, wielding weapons forged in the heart of volcanoes, have challenged these beasts. Their tales are not of victory, but survival, a desperate struggle against forces far beyond human comprehension. One legend speaks of a lone hunter who stood against a wyvern to protect his village. Armed with nothing but a spear and his resolve, he fought through the night, his movements a dance of desperation and courage. When the sun rose, the wyvern lay slain, but the hunter's life was spent, his body turned to stone where he fell. And yet, for all their terror, there is a strange beauty to these creatures. The way a wyvern coils its massive body, the glint of its scales in the firelight, the raw power of its roar, these are sights that burn into the soul, unforgettable in their majesty. The wyvern's flight, its wings cutting through the clouds like knives, is a vision of grace and power unmatched by anything in the natural world. The wyvern and the wyvern are reminders of chaos, of destruction, but also of awe. They are forces that cannot be tamed, embodiments of a world beyond human control. To stand before them is to feel the weight of mortality, to understand the fragility of life against the immensity of nature. They are not merely monsters, they are symbols of a world that exists in balance, where chaos and order, destruction and creation, are two sides of the same coin. The shadow moved before the sound came, stretching across the hills and fields, swallowing the golden glow of the sun. The wind began to howl, a strange, low whistle that sent animals scurrying for cover and humans looking skyward in dread. There it was, wings so massive they seemed to blot out the heavens, a span wide enough to shroud entire villages in darkness. The creature flew with an elegance that belied its size, each beat of its wings a thunderous drumroll against the silence of the sky. This was no ordinary bird. It was a terror, a predator, a creature born of ancient fear and the unyielding wild. Its cry split the air, sharp and piercing, a sound that felt alive with menace. To hear it was to feel the marrow in your bones freeze, to understand that you were prey in the eyes of something far greater. These creatures were the nightmares of the ancients, colossal birds spoken of in trembling voices around flickering campfires. Their names were etched in the lore of countless cultures, not as myth but as warnings. To tread in their domain was to invite their wrath. One such legend tells of the roc, a bird so vast that it could carry an elephant in its talons as easily as a hawk carries a hare. Sailors whispered of its presence, watching the skies with unease as they crossed open seas. It would strike without warning, descending like a storm from the clouds. Its beak could crush the masts of ships, its claws rending wood and flesh with equal ease. Survivors spoke of the roc's eyes, dark and endless, holding a fury that seemed almost human. But few survived to tell the tale, and those who did bore the scars of its rage. Another speaks of the thunderbird, a guardian of the skies, whose power was unmatched. When it flew, storms followed, the clouds swirling in its wake, lightning crackling like veins of fire across the heavens. Its wings stirred the air so fiercely that entire forests would bend and break beneath their force. But this creature, though fearsome, was also revered. Tribes saw it as a bringer of balance, its wrath unleashed only when the natural order was disrupted. Yet to stand in its presence was to understand the sheer fragility of existence, to feel the weight of a power so immense it could snuff out life with a single strike. Then there are the harpies, neither bird nor fully human, twisted beings that haunt the edges of civilization. With feathers dark as night and claws sharp as razors, they are said to hunt in flocks, their cries like a cacophony of anguish. They descend upon their victims with a savagery that defies reason, driven by a hunger that knows no bounds. Their faces, once seen, are impossible to forget, twisted masks of fury and torment, their eyes burning with a hatred that chills the soul. Each of these creatures, whether roc or thunderbird, harpy or others unnamed, shares one thing in common: their dominion over the skies is absolute. They are hunters, and the heavens are their hunting ground. To see them aloft is to feel a primal fear, the instinctive understanding that there is no escape, no shelter strong enough to shield you from their wrath. They strike from above, swift and merciless, their forms becoming shadows against the sun moments before the attack. But for all their terror, there is an undeniable beauty to these creatures. The grace with which they fly, the power in each movement, the way their feathers shimmer in the light, it is a reminder of the raw, unbridled majesty of nature. To witness them, even from a distance, is to feel awe and fear in equal measure, to be humbled by the sheer scale of their existence. In some stories, these winged predators are protectors, guardians of sacred places, or relics of unimaginable power. They perch atop mountains, their eyes scanning the horizon for intruders. Woe to those who trespass, for their fury is swift and unforgiving. Yet, in rare moments, they are said to show mercy, sparing those who prove their worth or offer them reverence. These tales speak to the duality of their nature, destruction and protection, chaos and order, embodied in creatures that are as much part of the sky as the wind and clouds. Not all who face these beasts come as enemies. Some seek them out, driven by curiosity or desperation. Hunters and warriors, poets and dreamers, all have gazed into the skies hoping for a glimpse of these mythical predators. They climb mountains, cross deserts, and brave stormy seas, each step bringing them closer to the legends they seek. Few return, and those who do are forever changed. They speak of eyes that seemed to pierce their very souls, of wings that stretched farther than the mind could comprehend, of power so immense it left them trembling. There is one tale of a warrior who sought to tame a colossal bird. She was bold, her heart unyielding even in the face of death. Climbing a peak where no human had dared, she stood at its summit and called out to the skies. When the bird came, its shadow engulfed her, its cry shaking the very stones beneath her feet. Yet she did not flinch. She raised her arms, not in defiance but in offering, her voice steady as she spoke. The creature circled her, its massive wings stirring the air like a tempest. And then, in an act that defied all reason, it landed, folding its wings as it gazed upon her with eyes like molten gold. What passed between them, no one knows, but when she descended the mountain, the bird flew beside her, its cries no longer of fury but of kinship. These stories remind us of the fine line between fear and wonder, between destruction and awe. The winged terrors of the sky are not just beasts, they are symbols, embodiments of forces far beyond human understanding. To face them is to confront the vastness of the world, the immensity of nature, and the frailty of human existence. They are a reminder that the skies, so often seen as a place of freedom, are also home to predators who rule with talons and wings. The ground rumbled, a low, steady vibration that traveled through the earth and set every heart racing. Birds took flight from the trees, their cries sharp and panicked against the vast silence that followed. Then came the sound, deep, resonant, like the heartbeat of the world itself. It grew louder, closer, until the trees began to sway, their branches trembling as if they knew what approached. And then, through the mist and shadow, they appeared. Towering beasts with tusks like curved spears, their massive forms moved with a grace that defied their size. Their footsteps shook the earth, their presence commanding a respect so profound it bordered on reverence. These were not mere animals. They were legends, beings so vast and powerful that their very existence seemed to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. The mammoths were more than just creatures of flesh and bone. To the ancient peoples who watched them, they were symbols of strength, endurance, and the raw power of the natural world. Their tusks, gleaming ivory that spiraled toward the heavens, were said to hold the wisdom of the ages. Their eyes, deep and dark, seemed to carry the weight of countless winters, countless storms, countless lives lived in a world harsher than any we could imagine. Some spoke of them as protectors. They roamed the frozen plains and dense forests, their massive bodies carving paths through landscapes untouched by human hands. They were seen as guardians of the earth, their movements slow and deliberate, as if each step carried the weight of ancient purpose. To see one was to witness a force of nature, to feel the power of something far greater than oneself. And yet, there was a gentleness to them, an unspoken understanding that despite their immense strength, they were not creatures of violence. They moved as if they belonged to the land in a way no human ever could. But there were other stories, darker ones, of mammoths whose rage could split the ground. These were not the peaceful giants of lore, but harbingers of destruction. Their tusks became weapons, their feet instruments of chaos as they thundered across the plains, leaving ruin in their wake. Entire villages were said to have been trampled beneath their wrath, the earth swallowing homes and lives as the mammoths unleashed their fury. What drove them to such rage, no one knew. Perhaps it was the encroachment of man, the cutting down of forests, the hunting of their kin. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a response to a world that had begun to forget its place beneath the skies. For early cultures, mammoths were more than just stories, they were sacred. Their images were etched into cave walls, their likenesses carved into stone and bone. Hunters would whisper prayers to them before setting out, asking for their favor, their blessing. To kill a mammoth was not merely to take a life, it was to face the wrath of the spirits, to tread upon sacred ground. Every part of the animal was used, every piece honored, as if to show gratitude for the gift of its life. Yet, despite their reverence, mammoths began to disappear. The world grew warmer, the ice that had been their home melting into rivers and seas. Humans spread across the land, their tools sharper, their numbers greater. The balance shifted, and the mammoths, once rulers of the earth, became vulnerable. Some say they fought back, their final moments a testament to their strength and spirit. Others say they simply faded, their great herds becoming whispers on the wind, their tusks buried beneath layers of earth, waiting to be found by those who still remembered. The stories persisted, though, passed down from generation to generation. They spoke of mammoths that lived on, hidden in the farthest reaches of the world, and valleys untouched by time or in caves where the sun never shone. They spoke of giants who would return one day, when the earth called them back, when their wisdom and strength were needed once more. And there are those who believe they never truly left. Hunters and explorers tell of distant lands where the ground trembles without reason, where strange tracks appear in the snow, too large to belong to any known creature. They speak of cries that echo through the night, low and mournful, like the earth itself remembering something it lost. Whether these are mere tales or the truth, no one can say. But the idea lingers, the hope that somewhere, somehow, the mammoths still roam. In their absence, they remain a part of us. Their images still adorn our walls, their stories still inspire awe. We find their bones buried deep beneath the earth, their tusks gleaming like treasure from another world. And as we uncover them, as we hold their remnants in our hands, we are reminded of a time when the world was wilder, when giants walked among us and the earth itself seemed alive with their presence. The mammoths were more than just animals. They were living, breathing symbols of a world that was vast and untamed, a world where humans were not the masters but a part of something far greater. To think of them is to feel a sense of loss, a longing for something we can never truly reclaim. And yet, there is also a sense of wonder, a gratitude for the stories they left behind, for the way they shaped our understanding of strength, resilience, and the sacredness of life. Even now, when we walk through the forests or across the plains, when we stand beneath the vastness of the sky, we can feel them. They are in the tremble of the ground beneath our feet, in the rustle of the trees, in the breath of the wind. They are the echoes of a world that still remembers, a world that still carries their memory in its bones. And if we listen closely, we can almost hear them, the steady rhythm of their steps, the low rumble of their calls, the sound of the earth itself moving beneath their weight. The forest was alive, but not with the sounds one would expect. There was no chirping of birds, no rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Instead, there was a hum, a low, thrumming pulse that seemed to come from the trees themselves. Shadows stretched and curled like living things, and the air was thick, heavy with a presence that could not be seen but was deeply felt. Those who wandered too far into these woods rarely returned, and those who did came back changed, their eyes wide with stories they could not fully tell. The guardians of these sacred forests were not mere beasts. They were something more, something older than the trees they protected. Their forms defied simplicity, massive creatures with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark, their bodies blending seamlessly with the foliage. Fur like moss, claws like gnarled roots, and antlers that spiraled toward the heavens as if they had grown from the very earth itself. These beings were the soul of the forest given shape, its protectors and punishers, its watchers and warriors. In the heart of these glades, where sunlight filtered down in trembling, golden shafts, the guardians moved silently. They were not bound by the laws of the physical world. They appeared where they were needed, shadows shifting into form, a ripple in the air that hardened into flesh. To see one was to feel your breath catch, your heart race, as if the forest itself had locked its gaze on you and was weighing your worth. It was said that they could sense the intentions of those who entered their domain. A traveler seeking shelter, walking softly and with respect, might feel their unseen presence but pass unharmed. The forest would seem to part for them, the path unfolding gently beneath their feet. But a hunter who came with greed, who dared to harm the sacred balance, would face the full wrath of the guardians. They would emerge from the shadows, their forms immense and terrifying, and the intruder would know, in that final moment, that they had trespassed where they never should have. Legend spoke of their voices, low and resonant, carrying words that were not words but feelings, grief for the trees felled, rage for the desecration of their home, sorrow for the countless cycles of destruction brought by careless hands. Those who heard these voices were said to be marked forever, their dreams haunted by the echoes of the forest's lament. The guardians were not mindless predators. They were wisdom incarnate, the living memory of the earth. They carried the stories of the land within them, tales of rains that carved rivers, of fires that cleansed and renewed, of roots that stretched and intertwined to form the web of life. Their eyes, deep and ageless, seemed to see not just the present but the past and the future as well. To meet their gaze was to feel the weight of all that had come before and all that would follow. There were whispers of a place, hidden within the deepest parts of the forest, where the guardians gathered. A sacred glade, untouched by time, where the trees grew so tall their tops disappeared into the sky and the air shimmered with a light that had no source. Here, it was said, the guardians rested and communed with the forest itself. This place was not meant for human eyes, and those who stumbled upon it by chance never spoke of what they had seen. Their silence was not born of fear but of awe, a reverence so profound it rendered words useless. In some cultures, the guardians were worshipped as gods. Offerings were left at the edges of the forest, flowers, fruit, carved tokens of gratitude. Rituals were performed to honor them, to seek their protection or their forgiveness. To the people who lived in harmony with the forest, the guardians were not something to be feared but something to be respected, a reminder of the delicate balance that held the world together. But not all respected the guardians. There were those who sought to conquer the forest, to bend it to their will. They came with axes and fire, cutting paths of destruction through the trees. And the guardians rose against them, their forms emerging from the smoke and flames like avenging spirits. The battle between man and forest was not one of equals. The guardians were relentless, their fury a force of nature. The ground itself seemed to rise against the intruders, roots snaring their feet, branches striking with the strength of iron. In the end, the forest always reclaimed what was taken, but at a cost: scarred land, lost life, a wound in the heart of the world. Even in tales of loss, the guardians were never defeated. Their essence could not be destroyed, only diminished, retreating into the shadows to heal and gather strength. And always, they returned, as eternal as the forest itself. The guardians were not just protectors, they were symbols of hope. They reminded the world that there were still places where nature held sway, where the human hand could not reach, where the ancient bonds between earth and life remained unbroken. To know that they existed, even in stories, was to feel a spark of wonder, a belief that not all was lost. To step into a sacred forest was to step into another world, a world ruled not by man but by something far greater. The air was different, heavier, alive with the presence of beings who had watched the rise and fall of countless seasons. The trees seemed to whisper secrets, their leaves rustling with knowledge older than time. And in the silence between those whispers, you could feel the guardians watching. Their presence was both a warning and a promise. They warned of the consequences of greed, of the destruction wrought by thoughtless hands. But they also promised protection, a shield for those who walked gently, who understood that the forest was not a resource to be exploited but a living, breathing entity to be honored. Even now, in a world where the forests grow smaller and the shadows shorter, the stories of the guardians endure. They remind us that the earth is not ours to command, that there are forces beyond our understanding, forces that will rise to defend what is sacred. They remind us of the beauty and power of the natural world, of the need to tread lightly, to respect the balance that sustains us all. And in the quiet moments, when the wind moves through the trees and the light dances on the leaves, we might still feel them, the unseen watchers, the protectors of the sacred, the feral guardians of the forest. The night was unnaturally still, as if the world held its breath, waiting. The moon hung low, casting pale light over the barren expanse, and the shadows seemed to shift and twist, alive with an eerie energy. From the depths of the silence came a sound, a guttural growl, deep and resonant, a sound that didn't belong to any one creature. It was many voices in one, a cacophony of snarls, hisses, and roars, layered together in a chilling harmony. Then it appeared. A monstrous figure stepped into the light, its form a chaotic blend of predator and prey, wings and claws, scales and fur. Its head was a grotesque fusion, a lion's maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth, a serpent coiling around its throat, and eyes that burned with an otherworldly glow. Its body seemed pieced together from nightmares, the muscular limbs of a great cat, talons like daggers, a serpent's tail that lashed violently, and wings so vast they blotted out the stars. It was a creature that should not exist, a chimeric terror born from chaos itself. In every story, the chimeric beasts were beings of both wonder and fear. They were hybrids, creations of gods or accidents of nature, and their presence brought nothing but devastation. To see one was to face the impossible, a creature that defied the rules of the natural world, whose very existence was a mockery of balance. Yet, for all their horror, there was something mesmerizing about them, a terrible beauty that drew the eye even as it made the heart race with dread. Legends whispered of their origins, each tale darker than the last. Some said they were crafted by vengeful gods, each beast designed to punish humanity for its arrogance. Others believed they were mistakes, the remnants of a time when the world was young and untamed, when creatures were not bound by the forms we know today. Whatever their beginnings, one truth remained: wherever they roamed, chaos followed. In one story, a chimeric beast with the body of a bull, the wings of an eagle, and the venom of a cobra ravaged a kingdom, its mere presence turning fertile fields to ash. It moved like a storm, its hooves shaking the earth, its wings stirring cyclones, and its venomous breath killing everything in its path. The king sent his bravest warriors to face the beast, but none returned. They said its gaze alone could paralyze, its roar could shatter stone. When the beast finally vanished, it left behind a land barren and lifeless, as if it had consumed the very essence of life itself. Another tale spoke of a creature that haunted the seas, a fusion of shark, dragon, and wolf, its body sleek and monstrous, with jaws strong enough to crush ships and a howl that could be heard above the fiercest storm. Sailors called it the Wailing Chimera, and they believed it to be the spirit of drowned mariners, bound together in eternal rage. The ocean was its hunting ground, and any who dared to cross its waters risked invoking its wrath. Entire fleets disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the beast and the churning waves it summoned. The chimeric beasts were not merely physical terrors. They brought with them a sense of doom, an oppressive weight that pressed on the hearts of those who encountered them. Even the bravest warriors felt their courage falter in the presence of such creatures. There was no reasoning with them, no way to predict their movements. They were forces of nature, embodiments of destruction and unpredictability. Some believed these creatures were immortal, their bodies regenerating no matter how grievous the wound. One story told of a chimera with the head of a goat, the body of a lion, and a dragon's tail that terrorized a mountain village for decades. The villagers spoke of a hero who had slain the beast, piercing its heart with a spear of silver. But years later, the chimera returned, its wounds healed, its rage greater than before. It was as if the creature was fueled by its own pain, growing stronger with every defeat. There were moments, however, when the chimeras were said to show a strange intelligence, a cunning that set them apart from mere beasts. In one chilling account, a chimera with the body of a leopard and the wings of a bat stalked a city, killing its people one by one. But its attacks were not random. It chose its victims carefully: leaders, scholars, those who held the city together. By the time the creature was confronted, the city was already in ruins, its people scattered and broken. These stories painted the chimeras as harbingers of catastrophe, but they also carried a strange kind of reverence. For all their destruction, the creatures were seen as part of the natural order, an extreme response to humanity's hubris. They were reminders of the world's wild, untamed side, a side that could not be controlled or conquered. Their catastrophic power was a lesson, a warning etched into the fabric of legend. Some dared to challenge the chimeras, seeking glory or revenge. Hunters with weapons blessed by priests, alchemists with potions said to weaken even the strongest of beasts, they all tried, and most failed. Their stories became part of the legends, their bravery remembered alongside their folly. The few who succeeded did not return triumphant. They came back haunted, their eyes shadowed by the memory of what they had faced. Even now, in tales passed down through generations, the chimeras hold their place as symbols of chaos and resilience. They are creatures that cannot be tamed, that exist beyond the rules of man and beast. To hear their stories is to feel a chill run down your spine, to glimpse a world where the impossible is real and the line between wonder and terror blurs. They are warnings, yes, but also marvels, reminders of a time when the world was wilder, stranger, and more alive. In the end, the chimeric beasts are not just monsters of myth. They are echoes of a deeper truth, a truth that lies in the chaotic heart of existence, in the fusion of beauty and destruction, of creation and chaos. And though the world may change, though the forests shrink and the oceans calm, the legends of these creatures endure, as eternal and untamed as the beasts themselves. The throne room was silent, save for the low rumble that echoed through its towering stone walls. Torches sputtered, their flames casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance and twist like restless spirits. And there, on a throne carved from black stone, sat not a man but a beast, a towering lion with a golden mane that glowed like the sun, eyes sharp and knowing, a crown perched upon its mighty head. This was no mere animal. This was a king. In the ancient lands of forgotten kingdoms, such creatures were not out of place. They were rulers, leaders, protectors, and tyrants, commanding respect and fear in equal measure. Stories of these beast kings lingered in whispers, carried by the winds through centuries. Their reigns were marked by awe-inspiring strength and unmatched wisdom, or by bloodshed and terror that reshaped the histories of men. One tale spoke of a kingdom nestled within a vast jungle, its people thriving under the rule of a tiger with fur as white as snow. The tiger was said to have been born under an eclipse, a sign of divine favor, and its arrival marked the end of years of human conflict. Under its reign, the jungle flourished, its rivers running clear, its skies free of smoke and ash. But it was no benevolent ruler. Those who broke its laws were brought before the throne, where the tiger's piercing gaze judged them in silence. No one dared to question its decisions. Those it found wanting vanished into the jungle, their fates unknown but whispered of in fearful tones. In another forgotten land, a great serpent coiled around a throne of polished obsidian. It was said to be as long as the kingdom itself, its shimmering scales reflecting the stars. The serpent ruled with an iron grip, or, more precisely, a crushing coil. Tribute was brought before it, gold, gemstones, livestock, and sometimes more sinister offerings. The people obeyed, not just out of fear but out of a twisted reverence, believing the serpent to be the bridge between their world and the heavens. They whispered prayers to it, asking for rain, for harvests, for protection from invaders. And when their prayers were not answered, they blamed themselves, not the serpent, for its wrath was seen as the will of the gods. Not all beast kings ruled alone. Some stood alongside humans, their presence a testament to a sacred bond between man and nature. In a kingdom surrounded by deserts, a massive black wolf was said to have shared the throne with a wise queen. The wolf, known as Shadowfawn, was her protector, her confidant, and, some believed, the true ruler behind the crown. It was said that Shadowfawn could sense deceit, that its howl could summon storms, and that its teeth could crush stone. Under their combined rule, the kingdom prospered, its people safe from the harshness of the desert and the greed of neighboring lands. But when the queen passed, Shadowfawn vanished, leaving behind a kingdom that quickly fell into ruin without its fierce guardian. Other beast kings were less revered and more feared, their rule remembered as a time of despair. In one chilling tale, a kingdom on the edge of a great lake was overtaken by a monstrous crocodile. This was no ordinary beast. It was said to be ancient, its body scarred from countless battles, its eyes glowing with a cruel intelligence. It declared itself king not with words but with action, devouring the reigning monarch and demanding submission from the terrified populace. For decades, the people lived under its shadow, offering sacrifices to sate its hunger, building monuments to its power. But the crocodile's greed knew no bounds, and eventually, its kingdom turned to dust, consumed by its endless demands. Yet, for all the fear these beast kings inspired, there were moments of wonder. A tale from a mountain kingdom spoke of an eagle so large that its wings could block out the sun. This eagle was said to have chosen the kingdom as its roost, perching atop the highest peak and watching over the land. The people believed it to be a guardian spirit, a bringer of peace. When enemies approached, the eagle would descend, its talons tearing through armies, its screech a sound that froze even the bravest hearts. The kingdom flourished under its watch, its people unafraid of the dangers that lurked beyond their borders. But such power came at a cost. The eagle demanded absolute loyalty, and those who failed to honor it faced a swift and brutal end. The beast kings were not always born to power, some took it by force. In one grim tale, a kingdom ruled by a benevolent king was overthrown by a creature from the depths, a bear, its fur blackened and singed, its eyes burning like coals. This bear, known only as the Scorched Tyrant, brought with it fire and destruction, its rage consuming everything in its path. It tore down the kingdom's walls, slaughtered its defenders, and claimed the throne. For years, it ruled through fear, its roars echoing across the land like thunder. But even the fiercest tyrant can fall, and in the end, the bear was defeated, not by strength, but by the courage of a single hunter who dared to face it alone. These stories, passed down through generations, carry an undeniable weight. They speak of a time when the line between man and beast blurred, when power took on forms both majestic and terrifying. The beast kings were not mere rulers, they were symbols of the forces that shaped their worlds. They represented strength, wisdom, and the raw, untamed power of nature, but also its unpredictability, its capacity for destruction. To hear these tales is to feel a chill, a sense of awe that lingers long after the story ends. The beast kings may be gone, their kingdoms lost to time, but their legends remain, etched into the collective memory of those who came after. They are reminders of a time when the world was wilder, when rulers were not bound by flesh alone, and when the roar of a lion or the hiss of a serpent could command entire nations. The air was thick with tension as the earth trembled under the weight of the Colossal being approaching. Its shadow stretched for miles, swallowing entire villages in darkness. People cowered in their homes, their prayers rising to the heavens, but even the gods seemed silent. And then, stepping into the silence, came a figure, not enormous, not armored in steel, but steady. A single human, armed with nothing more than a sword that gleamed faintly in the fading sunlight and a heart too stubborn to yield. The tales of the giant slayers are not ones of ease or comfort. They are stories etched in blood, sweat, and the unyielding defiance of mortals who dared to face creatures far beyond their scale. These weren't just battles, they were acts of rebellion against forces that sought to crush everything beneath them. The slayers didn't simply fight, they challenged the very order of the world. In one legend, a farmer's son named Kale stood against a mountain troll that had been tormenting his village. The troll was enormous, its skin like stone, its breath foul enough to wilt the crops it passed. The villagers had tried everything, offerings, traps, even desperate attempts to flee, but the troll's wrath was unending. Kale, barely a man, had no training in combat, no special weapon forged in fire. What he did have was rage, a quiet, searing anger born of watching his family starve, his home crumble. Armed with a woodcutter's axe, he set out at dawn to face the beast. When the sun set, Kale returned alone, dragging the troll's severed head behind him. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but in his eyes burned the fire of someone who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Not all slayers fought for survival. Some were driven by vengeance, their hearts heavy with loss. In the story of Lyra the Silent, a towering frost giant descended from the icy peaks, obliterating her village in a single night of chaos. Lyra, barely escaping the carnage, returned years later, no longer the girl who had fled. She had honed her skills, wielding twin blades as cold and sharp as the winds of her homeland. Her battle with the frost giant was said to have lasted 3 days, the mountains trembling with each strike. When she finally stood victorious, she did not cry out in triumph. Instead, she placed her blades into the snow and whispered a prayer for the souls that had been lost. Other tales speak of battles that transcended physical might. In a forgotten desert kingdom, a giant of sand and wind held dominion, its form shifting and elusive. No weapon could pierce it, no force could stop it. It was said that the giant was the embodiment of the desert itself, eternal and untouchable. But then came Ramin, a poet who had never lifted a sword. With words woven into verses, Ramin confronted the giant, reciting poetry that captured the soul of the desert, the beauty in its vastness, the sorrow in its solitude. The giant paused, its form quivering, and then crumbled into a cascade of golden sand. The people hailed Ramin as a hero, though he would later claim he did nothing but show the giant its own reflection. There are also tales of slayers who paid the ultimate price for their defiance. The warrior Kirin, known as the Flamebreaker, is one such figure. When a fire giant descended from its volcanic lair to raise the plains, Kirin led a band of warriors to confront it. The battle was ferocious, with flames scorching the earth and the sky filled with ash. Kirin's blade struck true, piercing the giant's fiery heart, but not before the beast's death throes engulfed him in a blaze. His name lives on, whispered by those who passed through the charred plains, now fertile once more, as a testament to the courage it takes to stand against insurmountable odds. For some, slaying giants was not just a fight, it was a calling. Legends tell of Elric, the Wanderer, who roamed the land seeking out titans that oppressed the weak. His weapons bore the marks of countless battles, his armor dented and scorched, yet his resolve never wavered. Elric's victories were not always celebrated, for his methods were ruthless, his presence unsettling. When asked why he took on such a perilous path, he would only say, "The world is too small for those who would crush it beneath their feet." The Slayers' battles were rarely fair. They faced enemies that could crush them with a single blow, creatures that seemed impervious to any weapon. Yet, time and again, they found ways to prevail, not through brute strength alone, but through cunning, determination, and the ability to endure. It was not their size that made them giants in their own right, but their refusal to bow. These stories are not just about victory. They are about sacrifice, the lives given, the scars carried, the loved ones left behind. They remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand firm despite it. The giant slayers were not always heroes in the traditional sense. They were flawed, driven by anger, grief, or desperation. But in their defiance, they became something greater. They became symbols of what it means to fight for something worth saving. Even as the world changed, and the giants of old became memories, the stories of the slayers endured. They were told around campfires, whispered in the dark, passed from one generation to the next. Each tale carried with it a spark, a reminder that even the smallest among us can face the greatest of foes. And while the giants may have been defeated, their shadows still loom, a testament to the battles fought and the courage it took to win. The sky above was painted in hues of orange and purple as the last rays of the sun kissed the horizon. Below, the ground trembled as a giant beast, its scales as dark as the night, moved with surprising grace for something so massive. Beside it, walking with an almost sacred connection, was a human, no taller than the beast's knee. There was no fear in their eyes, no hesitation in their steps. The bond between them was not forged by force or domination, but by trust. A trust that could not be broken, even in the face of danger. It was a rare thing, the partnership between humans and beasts of such immense size. Some saw these creatures as threats, things to be feared or destroyed. But there were those who saw something else, a chance to connect, to tame, and to ride alongside the greatest creatures the world had ever known. Jorik was one of those humans, a simple hunter from the northern plains. He had heard the stories, whispers of a colossal beast that roamed the deep forests. Some called it a dragon, others a god, but to Jorek, it was just a creature. A creature that had suffered for too long, feared by all who saw it, left to live alone in a world that misunderstood it. He found the beast one cold winter's night, its great wings folding against the snow-covered trees. It was a wyvern, its claws like daggers, its eyes glowing with an ancient, untamed fire. The moment they locked eyes, Jorek didn't see a monster. He saw a soul. A creature that, just like him, was tired of being feared. At first, the bond wasn't easy. The wyvern didn't trust him, and why would it? It had been hunted, chased, and feared for centuries. But Jorek was patient. He sat by the creature for days, offering food, speaking in soft tones, showing that he meant no harm. Over time, the wyvern began to approach him, cautiously at first, but with an undeniable curiosity. Then, one fateful day, Jorek extended his hand, not in command, but in peace. The beast, for the first time, lowered its head, and the bond between them was formed. From that moment on, Jorek and the wyvern became inseparable. The great beast carried him across the vast skies, through storms and mountains, over oceans that stretched into infinity. And in return, Jorek gave the creature something it had never known: respect. He never tried to control it, never tried to bend it to his will. He simply existed alongside it. And in that quiet, unspoken bond, they both found something that transcended everything else: freedom. Not all partnerships between beasts and mortals were as smooth as Jorek's. In the forgotten deserts, there lived a girl named Samira who had spent her entire life in the shadow of the great sand Wyrms. These creatures were not kind. They were brutal, devastating forces of nature, capable of swallowing entire caravans in a single gulp. But Samira had seen them differently. When she was a child, her family had been taken by one of the Wyrms during a journey across the dunes. Alone, she wandered for days, barely surviving the harsh environment. Then, when she was about to give up hope, the Wyrm returned. It didn't devour her, as she expected. Instead, it circled her, watching her closely. Samira, with no other choice, reached out. At first, the Wyrm seemed confused, unsure of her actions. But there was something in her eyes, a sadness that mirrored its own. Slowly, it lowered its head to her level, and, with a hesitant gesture, she touched its rough, sandy scales. From that moment, Samira's life changed forever. She didn't tame the Wyrm, nor did she try to. She learned to live with it, to understand it. And in turn, the Wyrm stopped attacking those who crossed its path, instead guiding travelers safely through the vast, unending sands. It wasn't just the monstrous beasts of legend that humans formed bonds with. In the ancient forests of the East, there were stories of humans who had befriended the colossal tree guardians, beasts of wood and bark, as old as the forests themselves. They were not creatures of fury, but protectors of the land, their great limbs stretching toward the heavens. The most famous of these stories was that of Alara, a young healer who wandered the forest in search of herbs to cure a plague that had spread through her village. She had no intention of meeting the great guardians, but the forest had other plans. She had spent days lost in the dense woods when she stumbled upon a clearing where one of the great tree guardians stood. It was vast, its bark withered by centuries of storms, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. At first, Alara was terrified. But as she knelt to gather the herbs, the creature didn't attack. It simply watched her, its great roots shifting to allow her safe passage. Slowly, she began to understand that the guardians were not mere beasts. They were the soul of the forest, and they were as protective of it as any mother would be of her child. Over time, Alara learned to speak to the guardians in the language of the earth, by touching the ground, by listening to the wind. And they responded. In exchange for her respect, the guardians shared their wisdom, guiding her to the herbs she sought, showing her paths that had been hidden for centuries. Alara's bond with the guardians didn't come from dominance, but from an understanding of their shared purpose. The earth, the trees, the creatures, they were all connected. And in that bond, they all found something greater than survival. They found harmony. There were many more stories of warriors who fought alongside great beasts, of mothers who protected their children with the help of the creatures they had befriended, of humble farmers who found their lives intertwined with the giant creatures they had raised. Each story was unique, yet they all shared one thing in common: the realization that no creature, no matter how mighty or feared, is beyond connection. And no human, no matter how small or insignificant they may seem, is incapable of forming a bond that can transcend the boundaries of what is expected. The bond between beast and mortal was not just about power. It was about understanding. It was about trust. It was about finding a place in the world where the human and the beast could stand side by side, not as enemies, but as partners. And it was this bond that would echo through the ages, reminding all who heard the stories that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from conquering, but from learning to live with those who once seemed like monsters. The ground shook with each step, the earth groaning under the weight of giants who strode through their mighty cities, their towering forms casting shadows over entire neighborhoods. These were the Titans, rulers of lands vast and uncharted, builders of cities that scraped the very heavens. They believed they were untouchable, invincible, gods among mortals. Their arrogance flowed like a river that could never be dammed, endless, unstoppable, and consuming everything in its path. At the heart of the greatest of these cities was the city of Thalmor, a sprawling wonder of stone and gold, its towers reaching so high they seemed to pierce the clouds themselves. From their balconies, the Titans gazed down upon the small, fragile creatures below, and to them, the world seemed like a toy. There was no threat in their eyes, no shadow of doubt in their hearts. They had conquered everything. The mountains, the seas, the winds, they had mastered them all. But in their quest for dominion, they had overlooked something, the very thing that had given them power in the first place. It began subtly, like a whisper on the wind. The first crack appeared in the grandest of walls, a small hairline fracture that went unnoticed amidst the bustling of daily life. No one paid it any attention. The Titans were too busy expanding, building, becoming greater. But cracks, no matter how small, have a way of spreading. And soon, the cracks were everywhere. The foundations of their mighty city, once unshakable, began to tremble. The earth itself, tired of bearing their weight, began to groan in protest. The Titans continued, blind to the signs. They laughed in the face of the storm, believing nothing could touch them. How could it? They were Titans, creatures forged by the gods themselves. They were destined to rule forever, weren't they? It was the simplest of things that started the end. A single miscalculation. One Titan, too prideful to listen to the warnings of the old sages, ordered the expansion of the city's borders. The earth was pushed too far, the sky stretched too thin, and the heavens grew heavy. The mountain that once served as the city's backbone cracked. The sky darkened. And then, the earth rose up. The first tremor was faint, almost imperceptible, like a distant drumbeat echoing across an empty desert. But it grew. The ground trembled underfoot. Buildings once thought unshakable began to sway, their towering spires creaking like the bones of ancient giants. The streets, once paved with gold and marble, buckled and twisted, cracks opening up like hungry mouths. Panic spread through the city like wildfire, the roar of the Titans' once laughing voices turning to shouts of terror. They had never known fear. But now, as their world cracked open beneath their feet, fear took root in their hearts. And then came the second tremor. This one was different. This was no gentle shaking. It was a violent, earth-shattering quake that rattled the very core of the city. Towers collapsed in on themselves, their shattered stone raining down like meteors. The earth split wide open, swallowing entire blocks of the city whole. The Titans tried to flee, but their enormous size made them slow, cumbersome. They were no longer the kings of the world they had once believed themselves to be. They were just creatures, like the ones they had so long ignored, at the mercy of the world they had taken for granted. Thalmor, the city that had reached for the heavens, was reduced to rubble. The Titans who had walked so proudly through its streets were buried beneath the weight of their own hubris. The ground they had once conquered had turned against them, and with each passing moment, their power crumbled into dust. As the dust settled and the echoes of destruction faded into silence, the survivors were left with nothing but the weight of their arrogance, heavy in their hearts. The Titans who remained were smaller now, diminished, their once mighty city nothing more than a memory. The land around them, once lush and fertile, was now barren, its spirit broken by the greed of those who had sought to shape it into their own image. And so the Titans, and their endless desire for more, had fallen. It wasn't a great battle, nor an enemy that overcame them. It was not a hero who brought them low, but their own unchecked pride. The very thing that had made them gods had become the cause of their undoing. And now, they were nothing more than ruins. Their cities, once shining beacons of power, now stood as monuments to their folly, broken and silent under the weight of their own making. In the end, the world didn't need to destroy the Titans. They did it to themselves. The arrogance of those who believed they were untouchable had led to their downfall. And as the last of the survivors wandered through the desolate streets, they understood the truth that had been there all along: power, when unchecked and untempered by humility, is nothing more than a spark waiting to ignite the very foundations it stands on. And in that moment, there was no grand victory. There was no sense of triumph. There was only the quiet whisper of what could have been, a reminder that even the greatest among us are not beyond the reach of their own mistakes. The Titans had fallen, not because they were defeated, but because they had forgotten the very thing that made them powerful in the first place: the land, the people, and the humility to know that nothing, not even a Titan, is eternal. There was a time when the earth whispered its secrets to those who truly listened, when the wind carried stories from the trees and the rivers sang of old, forgotten days. The world was vast, untamed, and beautiful, but it was also fragile. Nature, with all its raw power, depended on balance, the unspoken harmony between the creatures of the land and the land itself. But not everyone respected that harmony. Some, driven by greed or arrogance, sought to take what was never meant to be taken. And when the line between man and nature was crossed, the beasts awakened. The first tremor was small. Just a ripple in the ground, like the earth itself stirring from a long slumber. But it was enough. The humans, cutting through forests and draining the life from rivers, had broken the unspoken law. And nature, in all its fury, demanded retribution. Deep in the heart of the untouched forest, where the trees were ancient and the air thick with the scent of earth, the behemoth stirred. It was a creature of myth, spoken of in hushed tones by those who still remembered the old ways. No one had ever seen it in the flesh, no one had lived to tell the tale, anyway. But the stories, the legends, were passed down, a warning etched into the very fabric of time. The behemoth was a guardian, not of kings or queens, but of the earth itself. When the land was violated, when its soul was torn apart, it would rise. And rise it did. The ground buckled under its massive weight as it emerged from the shadows of the forest. A hulking creature, its skin thick like the bark of the oldest trees, its eyes burning with an ancient rage. The behemoth was not a creature of hunger or malice, it was something far more dangerous, a force of nature, awakened by the desecration of the world around it. Its roar echoed through the mountains, the forests, and the rivers, shaking the heavens themselves. It was a warning to all who had forgotten the sacredness of the earth. The humans who had dared to destroy what they did not understand were the first to feel the behemoth's wrath. In the villages, where the trees had once stood tall and proud, the ground trembled, and the air grew thick with the scent of destruction. Buildings that had been raised with pride crumbled to dust under the behemoth's fury. The trees, once felled to build roads and homes, were returned to the earth in a single, monstrous blow. The rivers, poisoned by the blood of the land, ran red as the behemoth's footsteps cracked the earth open. The very world was fighting back. In the moments before the behemoth struck, the humans saw it not as a beast, but as a force of nature, unstoppable, unrelenting, and untamable. Some tried to fight back, armed with their tools of destruction. But how can one fight the earth itself? How can you stand against the fury of the land that has been desecrated? The behemoth, though massive and terrifying, was not driven by rage alone, it was the embodiment of balance being restored. It was a storm that needed to pass, a wave that needed to crash, a fire that needed to burn. It would not stop until the world had been cleansed. The forest, once silent, now came alive with the sound of the behemoth's rampage. Trees seemed to bend away from its path, as if they too feared its power. The earth cracked and split, the mountains groaned under the pressure, and the rivers swelled, rising with the memory of times long past. The creatures of the wild, those who had lived alongside the humans in a fragile peace, now scattered in fear. The behemoth was not just a beast, it was a force, and the world could not stand against it. But amidst the chaos, there was something else, a quiet moment of reflection. For a brief second, when the dust settled and the earth fell silent, there was an undeniable truth: this was not a battle. The behemoth was not fighting for control, for power, or for vengeance. It was simply restoring balance. What had been taken could never be returned, but the land could be healed. It was the very essence of life itself. The behemoth was nature's reminder that no creature, no matter how powerful, could escape the inevitable pull of the world they lived in. And when the dust finally cleared, when the behemoth's wrath had passed, the landscape was forever changed. The cities that had once flourished lay in ruins, the ground scorched and barren. The rivers had returned to their natural course, and the forests, though scarred, began to heal. The behemoth had vanished into the shadows once more, its task complete. But the world had been forever altered. It would never forget the price of arrogance, the cost of ignoring the delicate balance between life and destruction. Those who had survived the behemoth's wrath would remember its message, carried in the wind, whispered in the rustling of the leaves: nature would always find a way to avenge what was lost. They would remember that the earth was not theirs to command, but to protect. The behemoth, in its terror, had shown them a truth they could not ignore. There was no force greater than the world they had taken for granted. There was no king, no army, no weapon that could stand against the fury of the land. The behemoth had come, not to destroy, but to remind. And as the survivors looked upon the ruins of what was once their world, they could feel the weight of that reminder pressing down on their hearts. The earth would not be desecrated again. Not while they still breathed. And as the last echoes of the behemoth's roar faded into the distance, they knew this truth: the balance of nature could not be broken without consequence. And the behemoth, guardian of the earth, would always be there to restore it. The earth trembled. Not from the steps of a beast or the winds of a storm, but from the wrath of the gods themselves. In the quiet before the storm, the giants knew. They could feel the heavens stir above them, the very air crackling with divine anger. The gods had given them strength, power, and dominion over the lands, but they had also laid down laws that the giants, in their arrogance, had chosen to break. It started with a single defiant act, one that seemed small to the giants, but was enough to send ripples through the heavens. They had dared to challenge the gods, to challenge the very forces that had given them life. Perhaps it was a thirst for more power, an unquenchable hunger for control, or perhaps it was simply the reckless pride that often accompanies great strength. Whatever the cause, the consequence was inevitable. The gods, in their infinite wisdom and wrath, looked down upon the giants, their hearts burning with fury. The giants, towering and mighty, had crossed a line that could not be ignored. The heavens began to darken, clouds swirling ominously, and the ground beneath the giants' feet seemed to crack open as the curse was unleashed. The first to fall was a mighty titan, known for his strength and defiance. He stood in the center of his kingdom, laughing at the sky, mocking the gods. But as his laughter echoed through the mountains, a voice like thunder boomed from above. "For your defiance, you shall be bound," the gods declared. And in that instant, the titan's legs, once the pillars of the earth itself, began to turn to stone. He tried to move, but his body was frozen, his every step a painful reminder of his rebellion. His mighty arms, once capable of shifting mountains, were now mere statues, immovable and cold. But that was just the beginning. The curse was not a simple punishment, it was a slow, painful unraveling. Each giant who had defied the gods was subjected to their own torment. One by one, they were cast into eternal night, their once brilliant eyes now blind to the world they had sought to control. Their voices, once filled with thunderous power, were reduced to whispers carried away on the wind. The giants, once gods themselves in their own eyes, were now forced to watch as the world moved on without them, their strength and pride forgotten. One giant, whose very footsteps had caused the ground to quake, was cursed to wander forever, his body stretched and broken by the god's wrath. His legs would no longer carry him, for the earth itself had rejected him. His massive form was now a part of the landscape, his body twisted and contorted by the god's anger, and his once great hands reached out, searching for something he could never grasp. In the distance, echoes of his mournful cries could be heard, cries that would never be answered. Another giant, who had dared to raise his hand against the heavens, was cast into the depths of the seas. The water, once his domain, now became his prison. He was doomed to drown, not in death, but in an eternal torment, where the weight of the ocean pressed down upon him, suffocating him in its depths. Every time he tried to rise, the waves pulled him back, dragging him deeper into the dark abyss, his cries lost in the vast expanse of the ocean. And then there were those whose punishment was even worse than death. Their very souls were twisted and torn, split from their bodies, and cast into a place between worlds. They were left to drift, neither living nor dead, forever tormented by the realization of their own brokenness. They had defied the gods, and in return, the gods had torn them apart, piece by piece, until they no longer resembled the mighty beings they once were. As the giants were consumed by their punishment, the world around them carried on. Forests grew over their fallen bodies, the earth healing and moving forward, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their once great existence. But the god's wrath remained. The curse was not just a punishment, it was a reminder to all who walked the earth that no one, no matter how mighty, could stand against the divine. The giants had been the greatest of all creatures, but in the end, it was their arrogance that led to their undoing. The tales of the cursed giants became legends, passed down from generation to generation. They were no longer seen as gods, but as cautionary figures, beasts whose pride had led them to their downfall. And as the stories of their punishment echoed through the ages, the world was left with an understanding of the balance between power and humility. In the quiet moments, when the wind rustled through the trees or the earth trembled with the memory of the giants' footsteps, people would remember. They would remember the price of defiance, the cost of arrogance, and the wrath of the gods that came when the line between mortals and immortals was crossed. The giants had learned too late that even the greatest of beings must bow to the forces beyond them, for in the end, it is the gods who hold the final word. And so, the curse of the Gigantes lived on, not just in the legends, but in the hearts of all who heard the stories. It was a reminder that no matter how mighty one may seem, there are forces greater than us, and the price of defying them is a fate no creature, no matter how powerful, should ever dare to face. The giants, in their arrogance, had learned that lesson in the harshest way possible. And their fall, echoing through time, still serves as a warning to all who would follow in their footsteps. There was a time when the earth whispered their names, when the winds carried the stories of giants and titanic beings across the land. In every corner of the world, there were those who heard those whispers and were drawn to them, worshippers who believed that the colossal beings were not just creatures of myth, but gods themselves, worthy of adoration, fear, and devotion. They gathered in the shadows of mountains, beneath ancient trees, and in the dark recesses of forgotten caves. They formed cults, small at first, then growing with an intensity that shook the foundations of the earth. These were not mere followers of myths. No, they were zealots, drawn into a faith so deep, so consuming, that their lives no longer belonged to them. They were the chosen few who believed they were chosen by the giants themselves. The cults of the Colossal had no leader in the traditional sense. The leader was the being they worshipped, and that being was always a god of immense size and terrifying power. The worshippers spoke in hushed tones, not out of fear of each other, but out of reverence for the giants they prayed to. Each ritual was an offering, each prayer a request for favor, each chant a call to summon the titans back to the world. These beings had long since disappeared from the earth, but the cults believed they would one day return to rule over the land once more. It was in the dead of night, beneath a blood-red moon, that these followers would gather. The air was thick with anticipation, their hearts beating as one in sync with the unspoken understanding that they were part of something greater than themselves. Their eyes would shine with a fervor that could only come from the belief in something so powerful it consumed them entirely. The sacrifices they made, sometimes animals, sometimes more, were offered in the hopes that the giants would take notice of their devotion, that they would rise from the earth once more. The rituals were always the same. The air would crackle with energy as the cultists, their voices rising in a chorus of chants, would call upon the name of the great being they adored. The earth beneath them would shudder, as if the ground itself was listening to their plea. Then, just as the chanting reached its peak, there would be silence. A deep, heavy silence that felt as though the earth itself held its breath. At first, it was nothing. The night would remain still, the darkness pressing down on the worshippers as if mocking them. But the more devoted they became, the more the earth responded. A rumble here, a tremor there. It was always a subtle sign, a hint that the Titans were listening. And for the cults, that was enough. Even the smallest tremor was a sign that they were on the right path. The giants were watching, waiting for the day they would return. But the desire for connection, for communion with these colossal beings, soon became all-consuming. Some followers began to believe that they themselves could become giants. They would carve marks into their skin, mimicking the patterns seen in ancient drawings of Titans. They dressed in skins of animals, wore horns, and painted their faces with the blood of their sacrifices. They believed that through their rituals and their devotion, they would grow in power and stature, that they would one day walk the earth as giants themselves. Their bodies became twisted with the idea, with the belief that if they gave enough, if they proved their worth, they could ascend to a place beside the gods they worshipped. But not all who joined these cults were in search of power. Some were simply looking for something to believe in, something larger than themselves, something that would make them feel like they mattered in a world that was too vast, too indifferent. The stories of the giants had always carried an air of mystery, of untapped strength, and there was something deeply human in that desire to connect with a power so far beyond our reach. To them, the Titans were not just gods, they were the embodiment of everything they longed for. Immortality, strength, control. A place in a world that felt too small for their ambitions. Over time, the cults of the Colossal became more radical. Those who once prayed for the return of the Titans now demanded it. They no longer sought the approval of the giants, they believed that the giants owed them something. It was no longer enough to wait patiently for a sign, they now believed it was their right to command the gods. They called for the giants to rise and take the throne they were meant to have, to crush the mortal world beneath their feet, and to restore the natural order. In their minds, they were the rightful inheritors of the earth, the chosen vessels for the Titans' return. But the Titans did not come. The gods remained silent, and the earth grew tired of their demands. The worshippers, unable to bear the weight of their disillusionment, began to turn on each other. Factions rose, each claiming to have the true path to the Titans, each claiming to have the secret knowledge that would bring the gods back. The cults fractured, their once unified chants now twisted into an angry, bitter noise. What was once a quiet, devoted prayer had become a desperate cry for power. Some cults disbanded, their followers lost to time and the endless search for meaning. Others, though, grew darker. They no longer simply worshipped the giants, they sought to control them. The ritual sacrifices became more frequent, the offerings more brutal, as the cultists' desires grew darker. They no longer sought the Titans' favor. They wanted their power, and they would stop at nothing to claim it. The land itself began to carry the scars of their madness. Ruined shrines stood in the places where the cults had gathered, stones broken and weathered by time, the symbols of worship faded and forgotten. Yet, there was something still alive in the land, something that would not be erased so easily. The echoes of the cults, their chants still lingering in the air, could sometimes be heard on the wind, carried through the mountains and valleys. For those who remembered, the cults of the Colossal remained a haunting reminder of the lengths to which people would go in search of meaning. And in the silence that followed their fall, the earth once again held its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to rise. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, making every breath feel heavier than the last. In the distance, the faint glow of firelight flickered in the night, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Beneath the stars, a group of figures knelt, their faces painted with symbols older than time itself, their eyes filled with an eerie devotion. They did not speak, for their gods did not need words, only the beat of their hearts, the trembling of their hands. They worshipped giants, beings so vast, so incomprehensible, that to even imagine their size was to invite madness. These cults were not born of simple faith. No, this was something much deeper. It was a consuming need, a desire that had taken root in their very souls, a desire to be close to something greater than themselves. Something that could crush mountains with a mere step and make the earth tremble with a single roar. In their hearts, they knew these beings were gods, gods who would one day return to reshape the world. The flames flickered higher, the heat of the fire intensifying, as if in response to the whispers that filled the air. They were chanting now, their voices rising in unison, the words strange and unfamiliar, yet full of power. It wasn't just a prayer. It was a call, a demand, an offering to the titans who slumbered beneath the earth and in the forgotten corners of the world. Each word was soaked in blood, sweat, and hope. And as the chants grew louder, the earth seemed to tremble ever so slightly, as though the giants could hear them, feel them. In these cults, there was no fear. No hesitation. There was only pure devotion. Their faith was absolute. The giants they worshipped were not mere creatures of legend, they were the embodiment of power, immortality, and nature's unyielding force. To be in their presence was to know what it meant to be alive, to be part of something far grander than moral comprehension. And those who followed believed that one day, they would be chosen to serve alongside these gods, to walk the earth as titans themselves. They believed the earth's massive storms, its earthquakes, and its storms were signs of the titans stirring beneath the surface. The crack of thunder was their footsteps. The tremor of the earth was their awakening. And the cults would wait for the day when these massive beings would rise again, bringing with them a new era of dominance, a world where the titans ruled as they once did. The rituals of these cults were sacred. To the untrained eye, they might seem barbaric, but to the followers, they were the only way to communicate with their gods. Blood was spilled, sometimes from beasts, sometimes from their own bodies. It was a symbol, a sacrifice, a token of devotion that only the truly faithful would understand. They painted their bodies with the blood of sacrifices, not just as an offering, but to carry the power of the gods within them. The markings were not just tattoos, they were marks of honor, reminders of the commitment they had made to the titans. The stories told around the fires were not of peace and prosperity. They were stories of power, of gods who crushed cities beneath their feet, who cast down entire kingdoms with a swipe of their massive arms. These stories were both terrifying and awe-inspiring. For the cults, the idea of destruction was not one to fear, but one to long for. The world of men, with its weakness and greed, had to be torn down for the new age to begin. The titans would rise, and the followers would be there, standing at their sides, the chosen few who had given everything in service to something greater. But there was darkness in the hearts of some. The more desperate the followers became, the more their devotion grew into something twisted. There were whispers in the shadows, whispers that said the titans could be controlled. That their power, their fury, could be harnessed for the will of the followers. No longer would they wait passively. No longer would they be humble worshippers. Some believed they could bring about the rise of the titans themselves, that they could force their gods to return and restore the natural order. It was this belief, this dangerous conviction, that led to the darker practices of the cults, the sacrifices that went too far, the rituals that became so intense that the line between worship and madness blurred. The earth itself seemed to rebel against their demands. The storms grew fiercer. The ground shook beneath their feet. The cults, believing their prayers had been answered, grew bolder. But with each sacrifice, with each desperate plea, the world around them became more unstable. It was as if the very land was rejecting their twisted worship, refusing to bow to their will. And still, the cultists did not falter. They did not stop. Their eyes were fixed on the heavens, their hearts longing for the day the Titans would return. The tension in the air was palpable. The followers were no longer simply praying, they were preparing for battle. They believed they could summon the Titans, not to stand beside them, but to command them. The thought that such power could be wielded by mere mortals filled them with a mad joy. They were no longer content to wait for the giants, they would make them rise. They would force them into action. They had given everything for this moment. Nothing would stand in their way. And then, one fateful night, the ground began to shake. It started as a tremor, a small vibration, almost like the earth was stretching after a long sleep. The cult's chants grew louder, desperate, as they felt the awakening. The rumbling grew stronger. The earth cracked open, and through the fissures, a flicker of something ancient, something massive, seemed to stir. It was the moment they had all waited for, the moment they had prayed for. But as the earth trembled beneath their feet, the cultists didn't see what they expected. They didn't see the Titans rising to take their place as gods on earth. No. Instead, they saw only destruction, an overwhelming, unstoppable force that consumed everything in its path. The ground split open with such force that entire villages were swallowed whole. The mountains, which had stood for millennia, crumbled to dust. The world was not being reborn. It was being torn apart. And in the midst of it all, the cultists, once so certain of their god's return, found themselves caught in the very destruction they had longed for. They were not saved. They were not chosen. They were consumed by the chaos they had summoned. The earth fell silent once more. The ruins of the cults lay scattered across the land, remnants of a belief so powerful it had destroyed everything in its wake. The Titans did not rise. They had never been summoned. Instead, the world was left with the echoes of a faith that could not be contained, a belief so fierce it tore itself apart. The air hung heavy with anticipation, a silence that could swallow the world. Beneath the golden glow of the setting sun, a group of hunters stood at the edge of the forest, their eyes locked onto the dark expanse of trees ahead. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Their mission was clear, to hunt a beast unlike any other. One that had haunted the myths for centuries, an ancient predator whose name was whispered in fear and awe. To capture or kill it would mean immortality. A legend born not just from stories, but from blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The leader of the hunt was a man named Kale, whose face was as hard as the steel he wore. He had spent his life training for this moment, and now, as he looked into the faces of his companions, he saw the same fear and the same unyielding resolve. They had all heard the tales, passed down from elders, stories of a creature so powerful that even the mightiest kings had fallen beneath its claws. The hunt had been called for years. The greatest of warriors had tried. All had failed. But now, Kale could feel it, this was their moment. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest scent of the beast. A deep, musky odor, like earth and fire, that set the hunter's nerves on edge. The hunt had begun. They moved in silence, their steps calculated, their eyes scanning every shadow, every rustling leaf. There was no room for mistakes. No chance to hesitate. They had heard the stories, too, the stories of those who had come before them, lost forever in the woods, their bones scattered like forgotten relics. The monster was real. And it was watching them. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, the twilight casting long, eerie shadows across the land. Their hearts beat in time, an unspoken rhythm that seemed to echo with the very pulse of the earth beneath them. But still, there was nothing. Only the rustling of the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. Then, it came, a flash of movement. A shape, too fast for the eye to catch, darted between the trees. The hunters froze, their breath caught in their throats. They had seen it. But now they weren't sure if it had seen them. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Without a word, Kale raised his hand. The group halted, crouching low, their eyes wide and alert. The air was thick with tension, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. They waited. Then, from the darkness, came a growl. low, menacing. The sound reverberated in their chests, a primal vibration that rattled their bones. It was close. Too close. The first to move was the youngest of the hunters, a man named Joran. Eager, impulsive, he had joined the hunt to prove himself. But as he took a step forward, the creature struck. It came from the shadows with the speed of a storm, a blur of fur and teeth, and before Joran could even raise his bow, the beast had him. A scream tore through the air, raw and desperate, as claws tore through flesh. Kale's heart hammered in his chest. He saw the creature now, massive, with eyes that glowed like molten gold, and teeth sharp enough to rip through stone. Without thinking, Kale lunged forward, his sword raised high. The beast howled, its roar shaking the very ground beneath them. It was like nothing Kale had ever faced. This was no simple animal. It was pure terror incarnate, a living nightmare. Yet, Kale's heart was filled with something else too, something darker. A fire that burned inside him, a thirst that had been growing for years. He would be the one to conquer this monster. He would be the one to become a legend. The battle raged on. The ground was torn up beneath their feet, the trees splintering under the force of the beast's movements. Kale's sword clashed against the beast's armored hide. The air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat, a fierce dance of life and death. But every time Kale thought he had the upper hand, the creature seemed to slip away, like smoke in the wind. It was faster than he had ever imagined. It was smarter than any predator he had ever faced. Time blurred. Hours passed in a haze of adrenaline and rage. His muscles ached, his vision blurred, but Kale didn't stop. He couldn't stop. There was only one thought in his mind: victory. Then, the creature made its move. It charged at Kale with a speed that made the world around him seem to slow. For a moment, he thought he was done for, too slow, too weak. But then, something shifted. A flicker of clarity, a memory of every hunt he had ever been on, every skill he had ever learned. In that instant, Kale's body moved on instinct. He sidestepped, his sword striking true. The creature howled in pain, but it wasn't over. The beast staggered back, its eyes locking with Kale's. There was a moment of stillness, a strange, unspoken understanding between them. Then, with a final, desperate roar, the beast lunged once more, but this time, Kale was ready. With one final strike, the sword found its mark, piercing the creature's heart. It was over. The forest fell silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the remaining hunters, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. Kale stood over the creature's fallen form, his heart pounding, his hands slick with blood. For a moment, there was nothing but the weight of what had just happened. The hunt had ended. But there was no joy in his heart. Only emptiness. The victory was hollow. Kale looked around at his companions, those who had survived, and saw the same look in their eyes. The thrill of the hunt had faded. All that remained was the realization that they had captured or killed something that could never be tamed, something that had lived far longer than any of them ever would. In the end, they had not conquered the beast. They had merely been part of its story. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Kale realized that the true cost of the hunt was not measured in blood spilled, but in the peace of their souls that would never be returned. The monster was gone, but it had left behind something far worse, the knowledge that even the greatest of hunters could never truly defeat the untamable forces of the world. There is a quiet, unsettling stillness that descends when you speak of the great giants and beasts that once walked the earth. The kind of silence that makes the air feel heavy, as if the world itself is holding its breath. And if you listen closely enough, you might catch the faintest whisper of something far older than time itself, the remnants of a world that no longer exists. The stories say they disappeared in the blink of an eye, as if the earth had simply swallowed them whole. Giants, towering figures that could shake the ground with every step, vanished from the mountains and forests without a trace. Great beasts, who once roamed the plains and skies, were gone, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of their existence. No one knows exactly how or why they left, but the myths speak of a time when everything changed. Some say it was the wrath of the gods that swept them away, a punishment for their arrogance, for their refusal to bow to the forces that controlled the world. The giants, proud and untamable, had ruled for so long that they thought themselves invincible. They had laughed in the face of fate, believing their power would last forever. But the earth, in its quiet way, had its own plans. And when the time came, the giants fell, not in battle, but in silence. It was as though the very ground had turned against them, swallowing them whole, hiding them from the world they had once dominated. Others speak of a different tale. They say the beasts, too, were victims of their own pride. For too long, they had roamed unchecked, their roars echoing across the mountains, their massive forms casting shadows over the land. But nature, in its endless wisdom, had a way of balancing things. Perhaps the world had simply grown tired of their presence. Perhaps, in the quiet hours of the night, the earth itself decided that they were no longer needed. And so, one by one, they vanished. Some say the sky swallowed them, others claim they sank into the deep, forgotten waters where even the sun could not reach. No one knows for sure. The disappearance of these creatures is not just a loss of life, it is the loss of something far greater. The world seems emptier now, quieter somehow. The mountains that once rumbled with the steps of giants stand still, as if mourning the loss of their former rulers. The skies, which once echoed with the mighty roars of dragons and wyverns, now feel silent and cold. The forests, once alive with the presence of beasts that could shake the very trees, are now eerily still. But it's the stories of the people who lived through those times that make the loss feel so much deeper. There are whispers of those who witnessed the last of the giants, standing tall against the sky before they vanished into the mists of time. Some say they saw the great beasts in their final moments, a flash of wild eyes and scales before they disappeared, as if the very earth had swallowed them whole. There is a sense of grief in those tales, a deep, aching sorrow that lingers long after the words are spoken. The humans who had once lived alongside the giants and beasts didn't just lose their protectors, they lost a part of themselves. They lost the awe that came with standing before a creature so powerful, so magnificent, that it seemed to defy the very laws of nature. For the giants, with their towering forms, and the beasts, with their terrifying beauty, were not just creatures, they were symbols of a time when the world was vast and full of wonders, a time when anything seemed possible. And as these creatures faded from the earth, so too did the magic they carried. The lands that were once filled with myth became just ordinary places. The mountains, once home to creatures whose shadows stretched across entire valleys, now stand empty, their peaks lost in the mist. The oceans, once home to great leviathans, now only hold the memories of those who once ruled the depths. There are those who believe the giants and beasts did not disappear entirely, they simply faded, slipping into the folds of time, waiting for the world to remember them. Some say they still walk among us, hidden in plain sight, their forms shrouded by the veil of legend. Others say they are waiting, hidden in the forgotten corners of the earth, waiting for the right moment to reappear. But those are only stories, stories of hope, of longing, of a time when the earth was alive with the presence of creatures so magnificent, so beyond comprehension, that they could never truly be gone. In the quiet moments of the night, when the wind howls through the trees and the earth groans beneath our feet, you can almost feel them again. The giants, with their ancient eyes and their unspoken wisdom. The beasts, with their wild hearts and untamed power. Their presence lingers in the very air we breathe, a reminder of what was once lost. A reminder that the world is not as empty as it seems. That somewhere, out there, in the depths of the earth or the skies above, the colossal still wait. And so, the stories continue. They live on in the songs of bards, in the fireside tales shared by elders, and the whispered legends passed from one generation to the next. They are the remnants of a time when giants walked the earth, when beasts roamed the skies, and when the world was full of the kind of magic that only comes when something truly colossal exists. And maybe, just maybe, one day the world will remember them, not just in stories, but in the very fabric of the earth itself. In the stillness of the night, under the dim glow of the moon, there are stories whispered by the few who still remember. They speak of a shadow that stretches long across the earth, a figure so tall it seems to touch the stars, moving with the quiet grace of a creature that once ruled the world. It is said that, in the hidden corners of the modern world, the last Titan still walks. The stories tell of an ancient giant, the last of his kind, who has managed to survive the passing of time, hiding from the eyes of mankind. He is not seen often, only in glimpses, when the wind carries a strange chill or when the ground trembles beneath the feet of the unwary. His presence is felt, not seen, as though the earth itself remembers his ancient steps and shudders in recognition. The Titan has lived through centuries, unnoticed by the busy world of today, a relic of a past long forgotten. Some say he lives in the shadows of the highest mountains, where even the wind fears to tread. Others whisper that he is a wanderer, moving silently through the dense forests, a solitary figure who keeps to the edges of civilization, watching but never seen. There are even tales of him taking refuge in the deep caves, where the light of day never reaches, and where the rocks have whispered secrets to him that no mortal has ever known. But what is most unnerving about the stories is the way people speak of him, some with fear, others with a kind of quiet reverence. They say he is not like the giants of old, whose mighty roars could shake the heavens. This last Titan is a quiet one, his steps gentle but heavy, as though he understands the weight of the world on his shoulders. The others, his kin, are long gone, swallowed by time and the cruelty of the earth. Yet, this lone giant remains, as if bound by some ancient promise, some unspoken oath to never let the world forget the glory that was once his. There are those who believe the Titan hides from the world because he is tired of being the last of his kind, tired of carrying the memories of a forgotten age. They say the weight of the world bears down on him, and the loneliness of being the last one makes him weep silent tears into the earth. There is an aching in his heart, the kind only a creature who has seen the passing of centuries can understand. How many times must one walk alone, with no kin or companion, until the weight of solitude becomes too much to bear? Others believe the Titan hides because he has been betrayed by the very world he once ruled. In a time long past, when his kin roamed the earth and the beasts of legend were as common as the trees, they were kings. But their rule was not to last. The arrogance of men, their thirst for power, led them to turn against the giants. The great Titans, proud and untamable, were cast down from their thrones. And in the end, the Titan who remains was forced into hiding, a shadow of a time that can never return. Some say he hides in shame, haunted by the memories of his lost brethren. Others say he hides out of fear, afraid that if he steps into the light, the world will destroy him as it destroyed the others. Yet, there is something deeply human in the Titan story. For in his loneliness, there is a deep, aching sorrow, a reminder that even the mightiest among us can fall, and that power, no matter how great, can be fleeting. The Titan may be the last of his kind, but he is not without his own flaws. The giant is a creature of contradiction, immense in size, but small in heart. His existence is one of quiet regret, a long, slow march through the ages, never quite forgetting the roar of the world that once called him king. He is not a god, but a lost soul, seeking redemption in the shadows. But in the modern world, no one knows his pain. No one knows his burden. The cities bustle with life, unaware of the ancient creature that walks just beyond the horizon, his heavy steps unnoticed beneath the hum of daily life. People have forgotten the giants, forgotten the beasts, forgotten what it was like when the world was filled with the echoes of creatures too large, too magnificent to comprehend. The Titan is a ghost of a forgotten time, forever out of reach, locked away in the heart of the earth, and yet, the world is blind to his suffering. Sometimes, though, there are fleeting moments, those rare, quiet moments when the world feels still, as though the earth itself is holding its breath. When that happens, it's said you can feel the presence of the Titan just beyond the edge of the trees or the mountains. It's in the way the wind changes and the strange vibrations that hum through the ground. It's the distant echo of something ancient, something powerful, something that reminds you that the world is not as it seems. There are no grand battles, no roaring beasts, no mighty kingdoms in these stories. The last Titan stands not because he is a warrior, but because he is a survivor. He has outlasted everything, time, man, nature itself, and yet, he walks in silence, a living memory of a world that has forgotten him. It is the quiet that makes him so haunting, the way his presence is felt more than seen, like the echo of a voice that once shook the heavens, but now whispers in the wind. The Titan remains hidden, not because he fears the world, but because he is waiting. For what? No one knows. Perhaps for the time when the world will remember him. Perhaps for the moment when the earth itself will call him home. But whatever it is, the last Titan stands, a monument to a time long past, a living legend who still walks the earth, waiting for the world to see him again. And in the deepest parts of the earth, under the starlit sky, he waits, alone, but never truly forgotten. There is a stillness to the earth that many never notice. The kind of stillness that sinks deep into the bones, creeping into your soul, like a heavy silence before a storm. But beneath this calm, there is a hum, a pulse. If you stand still enough, close your eyes, and let the quiet sink in, you might feel it. A tremor, a shudder, something ancient stirring far below the surface. They say this is the world remembering. Remembering the giants, the beasts, the titans who once ruled and roamed freely, before time and men pushed them into the shadows. Some claim they are gone, lost to the ravages of time, swept away like the last breath of a forgotten dream. But what if they aren't gone? What if, instead of extinction, there is a long, quiet slumber? A deep, unbroken sleep that stretches on for eons, waiting for something, anything, that might wake them. The thought lingers in the air like a whisper, the giants, the great beasts, they aren't dead. They're just sleeping. There are those who claim to hear their dreams at night, voices that murmur on the wind, a distant rumbling beneath the earth. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before the thunder strikes. They say that if you listen closely, you can hear the slow, steady breathing of something massive and ancient, echoing in the deep, dark caverns beneath the world. But when you look, there is nothing, no sign of movement, no evidence that something as colossal as a titan could still be hidden there. And yet, the stories persist. In the deepest corners of the world, in the untouched wilderness, there are whispers of places where the earth is different, where the air feels heavier, thicker with an ancient power. Ancient forests where the trees seem to stretch just a little too high, their roots tangled around something far older than any forest should be. Deserts where the sands shift in strange patterns, forming shapes that almost look like they were once a creature, now buried beneath the shifting dunes. The mountains themselves seem to hold secrets, their peaks piercing the sky like the jagged remnants of a giant's broken crown. These are the places where the sleepers lie. The locals in these regions don't speak much of it. They know better than to ask too many questions. They know that the ground itself has a way of answering in ways no human can understand. Some say that in certain places, the earth trembles when the wind shifts just right, as if the giant beings beneath the surface are shifting in their sleep, stretching their massive limbs. If you stand in the right spot at the right time, they claim, you can feel the ground rumble like the growl of a giant awakening from an age-long nap. There are stories of hunters who venture into these wild places, convinced they can find proof. They carry old maps, marking out forgotten paths, hidden valleys, and secret caves. But none ever return unchanged. Some come back with wide eyes, their faces pale, as though they've seen something too immense, too powerful, and far beyond human understanding. Others come back with nothing more than wild tales, of shadows moving under the earth, of massive shapes seen only in fleeting glimpses, too fast to grasp. The hunters speak of how they heard the earth itself groan, like the sound of a titan's voice deep in the earth, calling them. But when they turn to look, there is only the silence of the wilderness, waiting. And then, there are the dreams. Some claim that when they sleep near these ancient places, they dream of towering figures, creatures so immense they seem to block out the stars. They are not nightmares, but rather vivid, strange dreams of a time long past. The titans walk the earth, their footsteps shaking the mountains and valleys, their roars echoing through the ages. These dreams are not simply visions, they feel real. The smell of the earth, the sound of the giants breathing, the weight of the air, it is all too tangible. When the dreamers wake, the feeling lingers, the weight of something forgotten, something massive, pressing down on them. These dreams are not always comforting. There is a darkness that accompanies the Titan's presence, an unspoken threat that hangs in the air. The power of the giants is not something easily ignored, and those who dream of them feel a growing sense of dread, as though something terrible is about to happen, something they can't control. Yet, in the waking world, there are no signs. No footprints, no claw marks, no giant shadows across the land. Just the whisper of the earth beneath their feet, and the nagging feeling that something vast, something ancient, is waiting. Sometimes, it is said that when the wind howls through the mountains or across the plains, you can hear a low rumble beneath the roar, a deep growl that seems to rise from the very bowels of the earth. The elders, who have heard these stories for generations, say that it is the sound of the sleepers stirring, their long, deep slumber disturbed. Some believe it is a warning, a sign that the time of the giants is not truly over, that the earth is merely waiting for the right moment to wake them, to allow them to rise once more. And there is one thing the elders are certain of: the world will never forget the giants, no matter how hard it tries. Because the earth remembers. The stones, the rivers, the trees, all of them carry the weight of the ancient ones who once walked the earth, their massive forms shaking the ground with each step. The world might have changed, the cities might have risen, but beneath it all, there is a connection, a deep, quiet thread that ties the present to the past. When the earth shakes, when the wind howls, when the night feels too still, there is always the possibility that the sleepers will awaken. That the giants, the beasts, the titans, will rise again. Maybe it won't be today, or tomorrow. Maybe it will be centuries before they stir, but in the deepest parts of the world, the sleepers lie, and the earth remembers. And when the time comes, when the world has forgotten enough, when the silence becomes too heavy to bear, they will awaken, and the legends of old will come to life once more. A tremor shakes the ground, barely noticeable to the casual observer. But for those who've learned to listen to the earth, it's something more. Something that stirs the bones and quickens the pulse. It's the feeling you get when a storm is coming, only this storm is unlike anything that's ever been seen before. The world has long believed that the giants, the titans, the colossal beasts of old, are gone. But every now and then, something shifts. Something stirs in the shadows, and the ancient air hums with a strange sense of anticipation. It feels like the world is holding its breath, waiting. Waiting for something big, something unimaginable, to happen. In remote corners of the world, there are whispers. People who claim to have seen things that defy explanation. A man hiking through a forest, spotting something large and moving just beyond the trees, too massive to be any known creature. A family camping on the edge of a mountain range, hearing what they describe as footsteps so heavy, so ground-shaking, they felt their very souls tremble with fear. And then, the sightings. Glimpses of enormous shapes crossing the horizon, just a blur against the setting sun. Too far to confirm, but too close to ignore. It's almost like the world itself is waking up, as if it remembers that time when giants walked the land. These sightings are few, scattered across the globe, but they share one thing in common: they all feel real. The air feels thicker in those moments, as if something ancient and powerful is looming just beyond sight, waiting to reveal itself. Those who witness these events cannot explain them in any logical way. There are no answers. Only the unease of knowing that something too enormous for comprehension may be out there, still hiding in the corners of the earth. Sometimes, it's not a physical sighting but a sense that something is coming. A strange phenomenon in the sky, the sudden appearance of clouds too dark, too dense, to be natural. A prolonged silence that fills the air, as if even the birds and animals have ceased their movements, holding their breath, waiting. Even the most hardened skeptics cannot deny the growing feeling of unease that seems to hang over the land. Some call it a forewarning. Others, a prophecy. Ancient texts and forgotten prophecies speak of a time when the giants will return, not through violent rebellion, but through a slow, inevitable awakening. The earth will begin to shift, the sky will darken, and the ancient ones will rise. They will walk once again, towering over the world that has long forgotten them, their footsteps shaking the mountains, their roars shaking the sky. Some believe that the return of these ancient beings will mark the end of one age and the beginning of another, an age where mankind must come to terms with the colossal creatures that once ruled the world. There are those who believe the return of the giants has already begun. It's in the small signs, the inexplicable tremors beneath the earth, the strange patterns in the clouds, the mysterious disappearances in remote places, as though the earth itself is reclaiming its lost rulers. People tell stories of deep rumbles, the sound of something vast moving beneath the earth, echoing in the deepest caverns, too large to ignore. Some say they can hear the giants' voices in the wind, a low hum that vibrates through the ground like the call of something ancient. Others claim to have found strange markings, footprints too large, too deep to belong to any animal, as though something massive had once walked there, long ago. The stories are not new. They've been passed down from generation to generation, whispers shared in the dark corners of villages, in the quiet places where old men and women sit by the fire, recounting tales of a time when giants roamed the earth. But now, something is different. It's not just old legends anymore. There's something more to it, something that fills the air with a nervous energy, a sense that the old world is waking up, stirring in its sleep. People who once laughed at these tales now feel a gnawing, unshakable fear that maybe, just maybe, there's truth to them. It's the small things that get to you. The strange reports, the odd glimmers of evidence. In the wilderness, hikers have returned with stories of hearing thunderous steps, though no storm had passed. In the deep woods, camera footage captures strange, fleeting shadows, figures that move with an unnatural grace. But when the footage is analyzed, the details are never clear enough to make any kind of identification. Just enough to send a chill down the spine, just enough to make you wonder if the world is changing. There are also the prophecies, those ancient words whispered by mystics, scribbled in forgotten texts, hidden away in the cracks of old temples. They speak of the return of the Titans, of a time when the earth itself will tremble and the sky will darken. Some say the signs have already begun. They say that the winds are shifting, the seas are rising, and that deep beneath the earth, the giants are stirring, preparing to emerge. Some believe that they have been waiting for the world to reach a certain tipping point, when mankind has become too arrogant, too powerful, and that their return will restore balance. Others think the Titans have been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike, and that this moment is fast approaching. In every corner of the earth, there are people who feel it, the restlessness, the rumblings beneath the surface. Some believe the giants and beasts are watching, carefully observing the world, waiting for the signal to return. The prophecies warn that this will not be a peaceful return. The giants will come with fury, with strength, reclaiming the earth as their own. The cities built by mankind will tremble, the oceans will churn, and the land itself will shift as the ancient beings rise. And yet, amidst the fear, there is a strange sense of anticipation. Because, despite the terror these beings inspire, there is also awe, a deep, inexplicable awe for something so ancient, so powerful, and so magnificent. The world has forgotten them, but they have not forgotten the world. And when they return, they will bring with them a force unlike anything the earth has ever known. Some will run in fear, others will stand in awe, but all will remember that the giants once ruled. And when they come again, nothing will ever be the same. There's a quiet, eerie hum that follows the first strike of the shovel against the earth. It's the sound of something ancient, something long forgotten, being disturbed. With each layer of dirt moved, a whisper rises from the ground, as if the earth itself is warning, urging caution. The archaeologist, careful but relentless, brushes away the dust. And there, beneath the surface, lies a bone, massive and jagged, its size too immense to belong to anything known to modern science. It is the kind of discovery that sends shivers down your spine, the kind of moment that makes the world feel smaller, as if the earth has held onto something it wasn't ready to share. The world was built on stories. Legends of giants who strode across the land, of colossal beasts that filled the skies with their roars. Stories that were dismissed as fantasy, as the stuff of imagination, woven together by ancient minds. But what if they weren't just stories? What if, hidden beneath the soil, there were relics that proved them true? Every so often, a discovery like this shakes the world of archaeology, and with it, the stories we've held onto for centuries. They make us question everything we know, and perhaps more than anything, they stir something deep inside us, a yearning for answers, a hunger to know whether these ancient myths could have been based on truths long buried. A large femur. Too big for any modern animal. Its rough texture suggests age, centuries, perhaps millennia. It's been here, beneath the earth, for so long. And the archaeologists stand around it, not just studying it as a relic, but as a puzzle piece that has no right to exist in the timeline of history we've been taught. Could it be real? Could this bone, this relic of something impossibly large, truly belong to a creature so far beyond our comprehension? For a moment, the air around the excavation site grows still, as if the world itself is holding its breath, unsure of what it's witnessing. The researchers whisper among themselves. Some shake their heads, unable to fathom the implications of what they've found. Others are not so sure. Could the ancient myths of giants, of beings so vast that they could topple mountains, be based on actual creatures that once walked the earth? A thought begins to creep into their minds, and it grows, gathering strength. Perhaps these creatures weren't as fictional as they've been led to believe. What if the ancient bones buried here, bones that no modern animal could ever claim, were the last remnants of these giants? As the days pass and the excavation continues, more pieces are uncovered: bones, shattered skulls, fragments of massive claws, teeth that could tear through rock. The evidence is undeniable. It stirs something primal in those who witness it, something that says, these creatures were real. And perhaps, just perhaps, they didn't disappear completely. The thought lingers in the air, like a ghost that refuses to be forgotten. The excitement grows. The scientists now stand on the edge of something profound. This is more than just archaeology, it's the unearthing of a lost history, a glimpse into a time when the world was ruled by forces far beyond human understanding. As the pieces fit together, the image of these beasts, these giants, begins to take shape. It's a chilling and awe-inspiring picture. The creatures were not merely myth, they were real, and they once roamed the earth. The media catches wind of it. Headlines begin to appear, bold and provocative. Discovery of giant bones confirms ancient legends. People are transfixed. Ancient stories of titans, beasts, and gods, once dismissed as fables, suddenly seem to hold a grain of truth. But the question remains, how much truth is there? Did these colossal beings walk among us long ago, or was there some other explanation for their existence? The myths begin to creep into the modern world in new, disturbing ways. As the bones are studied, a chilling thought spreads. Were the giants and beasts the victims of some cataclysmic event? A flood, a fire, or a war? What could have brought down creatures so powerful, so invincible? And if they could fall, could they rise again? Could their return be written into the very earth, the very bones that have been buried and forgotten, only to emerge at the right time, when the world is ready to remember? Some say the bones themselves carry a curse, a warning. A reminder that the giants once ruled, but their reign was not eternal. The earth remembers their existence, and now, with their bones coming back to the surface, it seems as though the world is preparing for their return. People begin to talk about strange phenomena, lights in the sky, deep tremors beneath the Earth's surface, the sudden silence of nature. Could these be the signs? Could the bones, once buried deep within the Earth, be waking up something else, something far older than civilization itself? The power of these discoveries isn't just scientific. It's emotional, almost spiritual. The bones of these creatures represent something lost. The vastness, the sheer majesty of their existence, what does it say about the world we live in now? How small, how insignificant does human life seem in comparison? And yet, despite their immense size and power, these giants vanished. There's a tragic beauty in their story. They were once rulers of the earth, but time, like a thief in the night, slowly took them away, leaving only their bones as a testament to what once was. And so the legends persist. The stories of giants and beasts don't die, even when their bones are buried. They continue to haunt us. Perhaps it's the mystery of it all, the unanswered questions, the gaps in history that can never be filled. Perhaps it's the raw power of these creatures, the rawness of their existence, that keeps us captivated. We want to believe, to imagine a time when such giants roamed the earth, when the world was far more wondrous, far more dangerous than it is now. It's impossible to shake the thought, are we the last of the great creatures that once walked the earth, or have we merely forgotten the ones that came before? Are we truly the rulers of this world, or are we just the latest in a long line of beings who've risen and fallen, leaving behind only bones for the next generation to discover? On a clear night, when the world is still, the stars burn like diamonds against the velvet sky. If you look long enough, you might notice that some of them seem to form shapes that speak to ancient memories, that stir something in the soul. There, high above us, hidden among the constellations, lie the stories of creatures so grand, so powerful, they could have walked the earth like gods. But these creatures are not forgotten. They live on, not in the dust and bones of the past, but in the stars themselves. Take a moment to steady the sky, and you may see them, the silhouettes of titans and colossal beasts, immortalized in the heavens. The constellations, ancient and unyielding, hold the imprints of creatures that once ruled the world below. The stars are not just points of light. They are memories, etched into the fabric of the universe, marking the places where these mighty beings once stood. One constellation stands out, Orion, the hunter. But what if he wasn't just a man? What if the stars that make up his figure were not the outline of a mortal hunter but the shadow of a giant, a beast so massive it could wield a bow with the strength of 1,000 men? His belt, that unmistakable line of stars, could be the grip of a bow that stretched across the heavens, aimed at something far greater than mere animals. And in his line of sight? A monstrous creature, half storm, half beast, immortalized in the stars as Taurus the bull. The legends say that Orion hunted the great bull, a creature so fierce, so untamable, it could shake the earth with its roar. And in the struggle between them, Orion's strength matched the bull's wrath, neither willing to yield. But the bull was not defeated. Instead, it was placed in the sky as a reminder of its power, its defiance, a celestial tribute to the beasts that never gave in. But it isn't just Orion and Taurus that tell this story. The stars above us are full of these titanic creatures, constellations of monsters, giants, and gods that live in our imaginations. Look to the north, and you'll find Ursa Major, the great bear, whose wild strength could match the fury of any titan. The story goes that the bear was once a mortal woman, transformed into a beast by the gods. But even in her new form, the strength of the bear could not be tamed, and her spirit was placed among the stars, a reminder of the primal power of the creatures that once roamed the earth. These creatures are not mere myths. They are echoes of something real. They were once part of the world we live in. Their bones may have turned to dust, their roars lost to time, but their spirits remain in the stars, watching over us. When we gaze at these constellations, we are not just looking at points of light. We are looking at the traces of beings that were larger than life, whose power and majesty dwarfed our own. And somehow, we still feel their presence, even if we can no longer hear their roars or see their massive forms. Some cultures believed the stars were the homes of gods, that the constellations were the thrones of beings who once walked among us. The Greek myths are full of these celestial creatures, Ares, the god of war, locked in eternal battle with a giant, or the great serpent, Draco, coiling through the sky, a reminder of the monsters that were once banished to the heavens. In other cultures, the stars were seen as the bodies of fallen giants, their last resting places far above the earth where they could no longer threaten the world. And even now, when we gaze upward, we are reminded that there were beings whose footprints were so large, they left imprints not on the earth, but in the very sky. But it's not just the ancient myths that tie the stars to colossal creatures. Modern astronomers, with all their telescopes and technology, still search the heavens, still wonder if there are other giants out there. Could there be other worlds where beings like these still exist, far beyond our reach, hiding among the stars? Could it be that the legends of giants, of titanic beasts, were based on truths that we haven't yet discovered? Maybe the most unsettling thing about these stories is the feeling that they're not entirely in the past. maybe, just maybe, the giants and beasts are not gone, but waiting. Waiting in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to awaken. It's as if their presence is written in the very fabric of the universe, a cosmic imprint that won't be erased. The stars are a map, and the creatures we think we've forgotten are still out there, beyond our reach, looking down on us. Perhaps that's why these constellations have such an enduring power over our imagination. They remind us of something ancient, something primal. In the darkness of the night, when we look up at the stars, we are reminded of the creatures that once ruled the earth with raw strength. The constellations are their tombstones, their lasting legacy, and they seem to watch over us like silent sentinels. They know, as we do, that the world was once bigger, more dangerous, and full of wonders beyond our understanding. And in the vast, empty stretches of space, it feels as though those beasts might be waiting, biding their time, until the world is ready to remember them. And so, as we gaze at the stars, we wonder, what if these stories aren't finished? What if the great beasts, the titans of old, have only been resting, waiting for the moment when they can rise again? The sky, with its eternal, unblinking gaze, seems to suggest that this is not the end. The stories we've been told, the legends we've held onto, are far from over. And perhaps, just beyond our reach, in the farthest corners of the universe, the giants and beasts are watching, waiting, and perhaps even planning their return. The earth trembles underfoot, and the air seems to vibrate with an unspoken tension. A battle as old as time itself, one that has never truly ceased. The colossal and the fragile, the mighty and the small, locked in an endless struggle. The giants, with their towering strength and unimaginable power, stand opposite humanity, a race of beings whose greatest strength lies not in size or physical prowess, but in their unyielding will to survive. The first clash might have happened eons ago, but its echoes are still felt. In every corner of the world, and every story passed down through generations, the battle continues. Humanity has always faced the colossal, beasts and giants that could level mountains with a single swipe of their mighty hands. Yet, time and time again, humanity rises, driven by something more powerful than brute force, hope, determination, and the fierce will to endure. At the foot of a mountain, a lone figure stands, watching the sun rise over the horizon. His silhouette is small, dwarfed by the towering peaks, the earth beneath him vast and ancient. But there's a fire in his eyes. He is aware of what the world holds, what the monsters of legend once were, and he knows the challenge. There are whispers of giants still living, hidden in the depths of forgotten forests, or resting beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to strike. But humanity is not one to be cowed. From the first cave paintings, where early humans depicted their struggles against creatures that towered over them, to the legends of brave heroes who fought titans and dragons, humanity's narrative is one of resilience. With each step we take on this earth, we carry the weight of those who fought before us. And though the battle may seem impossible, humanity never retreats. The giants, for all their strength, are not invincible. They were brought low by the same weaknesses they tried to hide: pride, arrogance, and a belief that they were untouchable. They believed their power could not be challenged. But human determination, paired with wit and resourcefulness, has often turned the tide. A single spear can pierce the heart of a titan. A clever mind can bring down a beast larger than any army. There is something deeply haunting about this struggle. It's not just about survival. It's about understanding the limits of our own mortality. We, as humans, know that we are not invincible. But in the face of something larger, something untamable, something beyond comprehension, we find our true strength. In that moment of desperation, when there seems to be no hope, that is when we rise. And yet, there is a tragedy in it all. For every giant that falls, for every beast that is slain, there is a cost. The blood of the brave is spilled, and the earth is scarred. There are always those who will not return, those whose names will only be whispered in the dark, their stories fading into the dust. And for those who do survive, the battle is never truly over. It lives in them, in the scars they carry, in the memories of battles fought long ago. The giants may be gone, but their shadow lingers, like a ghost haunting the corners of the world. Some say that the struggle between humanity and the colossal is just a cycle, repeating over and over again. New giants rise, new heroes are born. The clash between the two is a reflection of the world itself, an eternal conflict between destruction and creation, between power and frailty. Humanity has faced this challenge since the dawn of time, and perhaps we always will. The beasts and titans that roam our stories are more than just creatures, they are a reflection of the darkness that exists in the world, the struggles we face every day, and the obstacles that seem insurmountable. But there's also something beautiful in this battle. Something deeply human. For in every struggle, every defeat, and every victory, we come closer to understanding who we truly are. The giants may tower over us, but we will never stop fighting. And maybe that's the point. It's not about defeating the colossal. It's about finding the strength within ourselves to face them, no matter how impossible it may seem. And sometimes, it's the quiet moments, the stillness before the storm, that remind us of the true cost of this struggle. The calm before a battle that will define the fate of a generation. The soft whispers of those who came before, urging us to keep going, even when the odds are against us. The giants may be sleeping, but they will always rise again. And when they do, we will be waiting. Not with fear, but with a fierce resolve. Giants and colossal beasts have always haunted the edges of human imagination, lurking in the shadows of our stories and cultures. Towering figures, often of unimaginable strength and fury, yet always with a sense of mystery, something not entirely evil, yet not fully good either. Their massive forms and overwhelming power have always represented more than just physical force. They are reflections of the fears, hopes, and contradictions we carry within ourselves. When we look at these creatures, we see not only the physical giants that dominated ancient myths, but the metaphorical giants that continue to shape our lives. In the stories of these beasts and titans, there is something we cannot escape, something that is both terrifying and deeply human. The giants are us, and we are them. They represent our greatest fears and deepest desires, our struggle against forces much larger than ourselves, and the part of us that longs for something greater than the limitations of our daily lives. At their core, these creatures embody the conflict between the individual and the collective. Humanity, in its desire to grow, to conquer, and to understand, has often seen the giant as the ultimate challenge. They are forces beyond our control, beyond our comprehension, yet they stir something within us. The giant is not simply a monster to be defeated. No, they are a reflection of our own inner turmoil, the struggles between our own desires and the forces that stand in our way. Every battle with a giant is a battle within ourselves, our struggle to face the overwhelming odds that seem to push us back, to show us that we are not as invincible as we wish to be. But there's more to the giant than just a symbol of fear. In the same way that they can terrify us, giants also represent the longing for something greater. Something bigger, stronger, and more powerful. In a world that often seems too small to contain our dreams, the giant embodies our unspoken wish to break free from the confines of reality. We look to the giants and imagine what it would be like to possess their strength, their size, their ability to conquer anything in their path. In the face of our struggles, the giant serves as both a symbol of power we wish to command and a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition. This relationship with the colossal is not a simple one. It is complex and layered, like the stories themselves. There is both admiration and fear, a strange pull between the idea of rising above everything and the fear of being consumed by that very rise. The giants, in their very nature, challenge us to consider what happens when power becomes too much. What happens when the desire for strength, for greatness, becomes all-consuming? Giants often fall in the end, not because they are weak, but because they fail to acknowledge the limits of their own power. They believe themselves untouchable, and that belief is what leads to their downfall. The presence of these colossal creatures in our culture goes beyond mere myth. They exist in the stories we tell ourselves about our place in the world, about the forces we must confront, and about our relationship with nature and the cosmos. They are reminders of our connection to the earth, to the creatures that came before us, and to the forces that remain beyond our understanding. These beasts are a part of the fabric of our consciousness, woven into the very structure of our myths, legends, and dreams. And just like our most ancient ancestors, we continue to wrestle with them in the stories we tell and the lives we live. But even as we confront these giants, we see that they are not merely threats to be fought, but forces that shape us. The stories of giants are not just about power or destruction. They are about limits, the limits we push, and the limits that ultimately push back. Every legend about a hero who defeats a giant is a reminder of human perseverance. But every legend of a giant's fall is a warning that no matter how grand our ambitions, there will always be consequences. The philosophy of giants is a story of balance. It's a dance between strength and humility, between might and wisdom. The titanic beings we face in our myths ask us difficult questions about our own nature. What do we do when faced with something we cannot control? How do we handle power once we possess it? These are the questions the giants ask, silently, as they loom above us. They demand that we consider what happens when we reach too far and grasp for things that are not ours to take. And yet, it's not all destruction. Some of the most enduring stories of giants show them not as villains, but as protectors, guardians of the earth or its people. In these tales, the giant is a symbol of strength used for good, a reminder that power, when tempered with care and wisdom, can create harmony rather than chaos. These giants don't fall because they understand their place in the world. They stand tall not because they tower over others, but because they hold the balance, knowing that their power is both a gift and a responsibility. But these are stories that are rare. Most giants, in the end, are brought down by their own excess. They stand too tall, they reach too far, and their hubris leads them to their doom. We tell these stories not just to warn of the dangers of pride, but also to remind ourselves of the consequences of ignoring our own limitations. The colossal beasts that roam our myths are not simply monstrous, they are a part of our psyche. They represent the best and worst parts of ourselves. They embody our deepest fears and greatest aspirations. They are a reflection of what it means to be human. Giants remind us that there is always something larger than ourselves, that no matter how strong we are, there will always be a force beyond our control. And yet, they also remind us that we, too, have the power to shape the world around us. We may not be able to slay the giant, but we can stand tall beside it. We can face it, just as we face every challenge in our lives, with courage, humility, and the understanding that the struggle itself is what makes us who we are. There's a chill in the air when the ground rumbles, the weight of a creature unseen pushing through the earth. The clouds part as a shadow looms large, and the sky trembles in its wake. This is the image of the giant, of beasts that once roamed the earth, towering over all else. But giants, both real and imagined, have always been more than mere monsters. They are symbols, reflections of something deeper within us. They are the stuff of legends, but their roots sink into the heart of human experience. They hold within them the philosophy of human nature, our fears, our desires, and the truth we sometimes try to deny. From the earliest stories told around campfires to the tales whispered in the wind, giants have stood as both guardians and destroyers. They are both a warning and a longing. When we look at the colossal, we see not just their size, but their presence, their power, their capacity to shape the world. And in this, we find a truth we cannot escape: power is not something easily controlled. Power, in its purest form, is dangerous, and in that danger lies the essence of the giant. It is easy to view the giant as a monster, a brute to be defeated. But what if the giant isn't simply a threat to be overcome? What if the giant is something within us? When we tell stories of giants, we are telling stories of ambition, of the human will to rise above limitations, to conquer what seems impossible. And yet, we are also telling stories of the downfall that often follows that very ambition. Every tale of a giant's destruction is a reminder of the consequences of reaching too high, of failing to see the limits of one's own power. But these colossal creatures are not just warnings of hubris. There is something more. The giants we fear also represent something we desire: strength, immortality, greatness. In a world that often feels too small, too narrow, we yearn for the ability to rise above the ordinary, to transcend our limitations and become something more. The giant embodies that possibility. To stand as tall as a mountain, to move with the force of a storm, this is the dream of the giant. This is the dream of us all. And yet, the same stories that speak of giants as protectors or symbols of untapped potential also remind us that power unchecked is dangerous. A giant that believes itself invincible is a giant that will eventually fall. The very thing that makes the giants so awe-inspiring, their strength, their sheer size, is the same thing that makes them vulnerable. For all their might, they are not invulnerable. Every giant carries the seed of its own destruction. The same thing that makes them gods to some, makes them targets to others. The same thing that makes them a symbol of hope, makes them a symbol of fear. We are drawn to the giant, not just for what it represents, but for what it can teach us about ourselves. The giant is a mirror. In its strength, we see the power we wish we had. In its fall, we see the price of unchecked ambition. There's a certain beauty in this duality. The giant, for all its power, is not a simple creature of destruction. It is a creature of complexity. And in this complexity lies the key to understanding the philosophy of giants. They embody the tension between power and responsibility, between greatness and downfall. They remind us that no matter how high we rise, the world is always ready to bring us back down to earth. The colossal creatures in our myths are not just part of the world outside, they are part of us. The fear they inspire is not just fear of what lurks in the shadows, but fear of what we are capable of becoming. They speak to the dark side of human nature, the side that seeks control, dominance, and the ability to bend the world to our will. Yet they also speak to something more, the need to understand the balance between power and humility. The giant reminds us that to be great is not enough. To be truly great, one must also know one's limits, must understand the weight of power and the responsibility that comes with it. But the giant is not just a warning. It is a challenge. Every time we face the idea of the giant, we face the challenge of reckoning with our own strengths and weaknesses. The giant asks us, how far will we go in our pursuit of greatness? What are we willing to sacrifice to achieve our dreams? Are we willing to face the consequences of our actions, no matter how small they seem in the moment? In these ancient stories, we find a reflection of the struggle between what we desire and what we need. The giant, for all its might, is ultimately a creature of imbalance. It is the very thing that drives us forward and the very thing that threatens to tear us apart. Giants are symbols of our most powerful emotions, the desire to rise above, the fear of falling, the drive to be something more. And in this, we see the central question of our lives: what do we do with our power? What makes these tales of giants so haunting is that they never give us a simple answer. There is no easy resolution. There is only the struggle. The giant lives on, not in the outcome of the battle, but in the very conflict itself. For the giant's philosophy is our own. It is the story of the human spirit, of our desire to reach beyond ourselves, of our struggle to maintain our humanity even as we strive for greatness. And in the end, it is the story of our fallibility, of the things we cannot control, of the forces much larger than ourselves. The giant teaches us that we are both small and immense. That we are fragile, yet capable of great things. And that in the end, it is not the size of the beast, but the size of our heart that determines our fate. The giant is both the challenge and the answer, the darkness and the light. It is the very embodiment of what it means to be human.